decided to join us tonight in this important discussion about race, equity, and inclusion in musical theater education. I would like to welcome both our members and non-members alike. And for those of you who don't know much about MTA, we are an international organization founded in 1999 as a means for professional artists and teachers to come together and exchange ideas, methodologies, and solutions to common challenges in the academic and professional musical theater setting. I, like you, are here tonight to listen and to learn from a distinguished group of colleagues and experts that our lead diversity officer, Tim Espinoza, has worked tirelessly to assemble. With that, I'd like to turn tonight's webinar over to Tim. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's presentation. Thank you, Stacy, for those kind words. And my name, like she said, my name is Tim Espinoza. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I serve as the head of musical theater at Fullerton College. And I have the honor of serving as the lead diversity officer for MTA's newly formed Committee on Representation, Equity, and Inclusion. Over these past few months, there has been a powerful movement taking place in our theater community. Students from across the country and across the globe have been engaging with their mentors and educators to fight for greater equity in their musical theater education. As educators, we have a responsibility to rise to the current moment and begin to systematically uproot the history of inequity that has plagued our institutions for far too long. MTA's Committee on Representation, Equity, and Inclusion was created to address these very challenges. Over the next few months, you will begin to hear more about the important work that we are dedicating ourselves to, including the implementation of actions and guidelines for fellow colleagues to bring to their campuses in order to promote greater diversity and equity within their programs, the development of an MTA scholarship fund, as well as the development of a faculty and student diversity mentorship program and database. Together, this committee will fight for every student, faculty, and staff member to create greater equity in both the classroom and the production experience. This evening's webinar is dedicated to beginning that important mission. Some of the work that you will hear tonight may challenge your current musical theater pedagogical practices. Some of what you hear tonight may open your eyes to new ideas and inspire you. And some of what you hear tonight may ask you to quietly exist in a brief state of discomfort. It is our sincerest hope that after tonight's presentation, some of the discomfort you may feel will be transformed into positive action. As we begin, we all ask you to listen with an open mind, open ears, and an open heart. Please know that every topic that is discussed this evening is done with a spirit of progress and with a mission of creating positive change for our entire industry. We are committing ourselves to creating a safe space tonight and encouraging you all to ask as many questions as possible this evening. It is also important to acknowledge that while tonight's webinar will address racial inequity specifically, the committee understands the intersection of inequity that exists in many other forms, such as the LGBTQAI+ community, mental health, as well as disability and neurodivergence. The committee is dedicated to performing the necessary work to create equity in all of these areas and will be planning to further expand its representation as we develop future webinars, conferences, and resources to address these topics. As a reminder, we would like to ask you to please keep your video and audio muted throughout the duration of the webinar. That would be greatly appreciated. We also encourage you to navigate all of your questions directly into the Q&A box versus the chat box, so the panelists can have the opportunity to answer all of your questions, as many as possible. At the end of each topic, we will be dedicating some time to answer as many of your questions as we can. Without further ado, we are grateful to have you join us this evening. Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our first two speakers this evening. Please welcome Marty Lamar, coordinator of the BFA Musical Theater program at Howard University, and Gwen Walker, assistant professor of musical theater at Penn State University.
Good evening. This is Intentional. My name is Marty Lamar. I use he and him pronouns, and I am a Black male identifying musical theater artist and educator.
My name is Gwendolyn Walker. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a white female identifying musical theater educator and artist.
We understand that our work together is more powerful than our work would be separately.
In our diversity is our strength, and we have so much to learn from each other.
For many of us, much of our work is listening and educating ourselves.
Did you know that the first professional performance of a musical in the United States was John Gay's The Beggar's Opera in 1750? 130 years after the beginning of slavery and 113 years before the end of slavery. So highly influenced by the culture of slavery.
Did you know the oldest recorded form of synthesized musical theater, that means including acting, singing, and dancing to tell stories in the United States, is the minstrel show, first seen in the 1830s. The minstrel show is a uniquely American art form because it has no roots in the Greek, Roman, or European arenas of theater.
Did you know that blackface is the act of using burnt cork ash or black shoe polish to darken a performer's complexion to caricaturize and dehumanize persons of African descent?
Blackface was worn by white performers beginning in the 1830s and didn't start to decline in popularity until 100 years later in the 1930s.
Blackface enforced a range of negative stereotypes and further ignited racial unrest over a white supremacist political system.
While blackface experienced a decline in popularity by white performers after the 1930s, African American performers continued to use blackface to ensure their employment and exposure on the American stage.
Musical theater in the United States has turned a blind eye to the lasting effects of blackface in theater training, hiring, and production.
Did you know Thomas Rice, a white American actor, is considered the daddy of the minstrel show? Rice introduced the character of Jim Crow in the early 1830s.
Rice sang and danced in blackface, caricaturizing the religious practices and traditions of enslaved Africans on the plantation.
Did you know Jim Crow laws harshly mandated the segregation between Black and white citizens in public schools, restrooms, and at water fountains and restaurants?
Oops. These laws were in effect from the end of the Reconstruction era, period after the Civil War, approximately 1865 to 1877, and to the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Again, 100 years.
Did you know the first African American to win a Tony Award was Juanita Hall in 1950? And Sister Hall
was awarded the Tony Award for Best Featured Actress in a Musical for her role as Bloody Mary in Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific.
Did you know that almost all musical theater history textbooks used in higher education are written by white men?
Oops. Did you know that 95% of the shows on Broadway in the 2016-2017 season were directed by white directors or written by white playwrights and rarely focus on the contributions of Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, and minoritized communities?
Did you know in this same survey of Broadway and nonprofit actors, 66.8% were Caucasian. 18.6% were African American.
7.3% were Asian American. 5.1% were Latinx. These non-white numbers are much higher than in previous years due to a little musical called Hamilton and August Wilson's Jitney that was playing at the Samuel L. Friedman Theater that year.
Did you know off-Broadway and non-profit playwrights combined, 86.8% were Caucasian.
Of Broadway and nonprofit directors combined, 87.1% were Caucasian.
Did you know post-secondary faculty are predominantly white?
Of professors, 19% are non-white, and that is defined in this Pew Research Center study as including Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, Pacific Islanders, American Indians, or Alaska Natives, and those of 2 more races.
Associate professors equals 24%, and non-white 24% non-white, and 76% white.
You get the idea. In other words,
the industry reflects the current hiring practices and diversity disparities within higher education. Together, we must do better.
Our goal this evening is to build a community where we can be brave enough to have difficult conversations and to be uncomfortable together.
We celebrate your presence, and we celebrate you for being here with us this evening. My name is Marty Lamar, and I have been complicit.
My name is Gwendolyn Walker, and I have been complicit.
It's my job to educate myself.
It's my job to educate myself.
And not put the burden of that education on my students.
And not put the burden of that education on my students.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Marty and Gwen, for those wonderful words and very important words. To start us off tonight, we are going to be discussing musical theater and equity in the classroom environment. And it is my honor to welcome our first panelist this evening. So please give a warm welcome to Rufus Bonds Jr., Assistant Professor of Musical Theater at Syracuse University.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. We as educators are all successful because somewhere along the line, someone saw us, someone saw our potential and poured into our lives. And in many cases, this happened in the classroom. We as educators have the honor of shaping lives, shaping extraordinary artists, extraordinary voices, and full human beings. And this only happens when we see our students and also see the cultures that they are from. I would like to use that as an example, one of the classes that I taught, acting a song. And my whole through line is about seeing the student. The first assignment was for the students to select a song that they wanted to sing that spoke from who they were, their voice, what they wanted to say, and why. And after they sang the song, we talked about it and talked about what they wanted to say and who they were and what their voice was. And this was done so that, number one, they realized, I want to know. And number two, that it's important to always bring yourself to the material. The second song that was selected was Who Can I Turn To When Nobody Needs Me? We all know what it feels like to be rejected, unwanted, to have heartbreak, or to have pain. And it was important for me to assign that song so the students can show up in a way to be extremely vulnerable. To be extremely vulnerable so that they can share that side of themselves in the classroom with everyone and to go through the moment. And for my task to guide them through to the other side when the pain is too much. This is done to gain trust. And so they know that I care, I see you, and it's important to me. And it's important, once again, for you to always show up. Then on the other end of the spectrum, I assign Something's Coming from West Side Story. This is because I believe all things are possible. I believe that we achieve what we really believe we will achieve, and we can achieve anything we want to. And this is what I teach to the students, that anything is possible. So I selected this song so they can go to the other spectrum of their life to show their joy, show their happiness, show what sets them on fire, to show who they are in that realm. And so that they can realize that it's important to dream big and to continue to go after what you want. Once again, to see them, encourage their voice, encourage them to fight on for what they want. And then I use culture as a tool to investigate diversity. I used Once on This Island, the musical Once on This Island. And we read the book, My Love from Rosa Guy. And we read the book and we talked about the book. We talked about the differences because that book is what Once on This Island was based from. And we talked about the differences in the book, why they were different, possible, how the ending was drastically different and why. And then we also researched the culture, the Haitian culture, the people of the culture by which this piece was written about. Because I also stated that if you don't know the story of a people, and if you don't know their voice, there's no way you can sing their songs. After we did that, we investigated the history, the timelines of the history, and all of this associated with this culture of people. After that investigation, I then assigned songs. And as class began, I could feel something in the room. And I knew conversations were had about why am I singing this song? And so this one young lady, wonderful young lady, came to me and she said, Rufus, I don't feel comfortable singing this material that is not of my culture. And I said to her, if I felt that way, there would be nothing for me to sing. All of my career, all of my learning, I had to sing material that was not of my culture. And then I reiterated to her, this is not material that you are to go out into the world and sing. This is for you to understand a whole different culture and to experience this wonderful music. That moment allowed them to see me, the Black man in the room, in musical theater, and the restrictions that were tried to place on my life in terms of what I could and could not do, because I believe I can do anything I want to do. But yet and still, the canon for a Black man in musical theater is not as vast. So therefore, there's a difference between my experience and your experience in the musical theater world. And after we did that, she came to me after class, thanked me, and took the journey with me, and took the journey through the material. I also told her and the rest of the class, those who were non-color, there were 18 students and there were 4 of color. And no matter what you're doing, I was telling you, always have to have a point of view from your culture. What is it about you and your family that you still can bring to this material? Because that is your truth, because that's how you have to walk in life. So you still have to bring your life to the material. After that moment, well, no, I want to speak to what happens when a person of color is not seen. When a person of color's culture is not investigated, warranted. That person, that student feels invisible, unwanted, and that their culture is not validated or valuable. So therefore, they go through the process also feeling like they're asked to blend in to a world that doesn't see them. It is extremely important that no matter what the material is, if I'm playing a Russian and I'm Black, where do I still find my point of view? Where do I find my culture in that? It's important for me to do that kind of research to find out where the Black Russian sits in this piece in order to exist as a whole person. When a person goes through this for 4 years and they leave university, they will have the tools, they will have the technique, they will have everything they need to be successful. But it's important for us to see them and this is everyone, so that when they leave, their healing process from scars will not be long. It is important for us to see our students, to pour into our students, to allow them to speak from their culture, from their lives, so they can show up as full, powerful human beings. Thank you. Now I'm going to turn this over to Britney Chanel Johnson from Howard University.
Good evening, everyone. Imagine being Black, entering a lesson, and hearing a highly regarded white woman ask, "Why are you singing Defying Gravity like it's gospel?" What? I'm sorry, I don't understand. You're too loud, you're pushing from the throat, and it's just not right. Wait a minute. Is this really the way that we talk to students? Maybe we should approach it differently. If I were honest, many vocal educators have said, or at least thought, something this offensive, if not worse. These things are said with bias and without full understanding of what is being implied. Having diversity, equity, and inclusion within the vocal studio requires that we step back, get our biases in line, and teach with more humility in mind. Now let's go back to that lesson. So it was obvious to me that that teacher was not culturally competent, that she had leaned into the stereotypes of what she thought gospel music was, and that she'd fallen into the trance of the Purple Robe Club. You know, the Purple Robe Club, they stand behind the artist swaying and loud singing, right? No, that's not what gospel music is. That's not what any music is. All music has nuance, and it requires that we as educators take the time to get to know our students, their cultures, and the music of their culture. If that teacher had just started by saying, "That's too loud, maybe back off. You're pushing. Let's try moving that sound from the throat," or giving me some different instruction, we'd have gotten farther faster, I guarantee it. As educators, it's our responsibility to mind our mouths. Most of the stuff we think is cool to say isn't. Each student that we serve deserves equity, access, and culturally responsible teaching at the very least. To teach with equity, diversity, and inclusion in mind at the forefront, we have to do a couple of things. So I'm just going to talk about 3 things that I like to consider when I'm teaching. The first is that we must meet students where they are. By that, I mean, we have to find ways to relate the science of the voice to what they already know without making insensitive parallels. That teacher was trying to make a parallel, but it was insensitive. We can meet them where they are by giving good foundational technique and knowledge of various styles without making a mockery. We don't always have to demonstrate for our students. The internet is a wonderful invention, and there are many, many, many examples that we can use. To meet them where they are, we make sure that all students, and I mean all, explore and have some level of proficiency in all genres within the musical theater canon. That means that just because I have a voice that leans towards one thing, that doesn't mean that's the only thing that I should be taught. Equity means that everybody gets a fair shot. So it might take a little more with me than it does with another student. It might take even more for another student that you have. But so that they can get an equitable education, we must do that work. So first, we meet the students where they are. Second, we approach singing culturally. Often we only stick with science. Science is great, but unfortunately, most studies don't include people that look like me. And our singing experience is different. Approaching singing from a cultural standpoint requires that we understand the soundscape that our students bring to the table. So let me tell you about one of my students. This past year, I had a young lady, and she's very talented. And we started working in the studio, working, going. And I just could not understand why, when we worked on all these correcting things, that we still had this nasal sound, that it was still, even when we were dealing with adjusting the breath mechanism and adjusting the way that she was producing sound, it was still a bit pushed. So in doing what I do as an educator, I got to know this student. And I began to understand her culture. She's Afro-Guyanese. And if I go listen to that sound, the sounds that those people make when they sing, when that culture sings, it can be something that's seen or heard as nasal, or as something that's not as relaxed. But it can also be seen as something, or heard as something, that is close to speech. So what I do, I said, okay, baby, we're going to approach this from speech. I didn't say, oh, why are you singing so nasally? Why are you pushing? We have to find cultural approaches. And as Rufus was saying just a few moments ago, we have to find ways so that students can see themselves in everything that we're doing. So we've got to work not just with science, but with culture. Understand the soundscape that these young people come from. And then we still have to understand that none of this requires different foundational techniques. Singing is singing. We just have to marry the science of foundational technique with culture. So I've given you two things so far. We meet students where they are, and we approach singing from a cultural standpoint. I'm just going to give you three, so the last is this. Be willing to work outside of our own scope of knowledge. So sometimes it's hard for me to admit, but I don't know everything, and that's all right. I don't know everything about the science of the voice. I don't know everything about being culturally responsive to my students. But what I will say is that I am open to correction, not only from colleagues, but from my students as well. We must make certain that students understand that we see them, and that although their current vocal need may elude our understanding, it does not affect their merit or worth as a performer. A lot of students, it is our responsibility, to make sure that they leave us understanding who they are as a performer and that they're ready to go get work. So we have to make sure that we can put ourselves aside so that we can ensure that our students receive diversity, equity, and inclusion in our work. So I say all of this to say, I want you to understand that assumptions lead to misunderstandings. So why even make them? Instead, what I encourage educators to do is to approach science-based vocal instruction through the lens of cultural nuance. Thank you for listening to me speak just a little while today. I look forward to future conversations with many of you. Now I want to welcome our next panelist, Wilson Mendieta from Chapman University. Thank you.
Thank you, Britney. And thank you everyone for being here. Well, I am learning how to own my own experiences and actively infuse them into my teaching practices. And to begin with, I must state loudly that I am my own research and it is valid, for it has been informed by my skin color, my gender, my sexuality, my culture, my experiences, how I view the world, and my perception of how the world views me. The combination of all these things are integral to the theory of dance education. To me, dance training and dance education should mirror the experience of a baby learning to walk. That trial and error process makes everyone in the room align themselves with the external and internal experiences of that baby. The circularity of breath as the baby defies gravity, then the baby falls and the fears are reflected in the baby's eyes. The baby looks around to see if that fear is presented in those watching, but typically those watching burst into applause and encouraging cheers. So the baby rolls over to stand up and try again. And to me, that celebration of trial and error is at the heart of dance education. And that process is specific to that child. We don't compare this child's process with the process of another child. This theory embraces not just the students, so we as educators must give us the space and permission to fail and get up again. As many of you probably have been doing during this quarantine time, I have been engaging in chat rooms and online discussions about dance education at a global level, which has been an important education all on its own. But one conversation stood out to me was about someone admitting not knowing and needing guidance in finding resources that note the contributions from people of color to dance. Now, I admire the vulnerability of that teacher admitting not knowing that, especially in a virtual space where people can hide behind a keyboard and be extremely inhumane. But let me say this out loud for all of us to hear, including myself. Any of us lacking that knowledge, we must seek it now. In 2020, we cannot have spaces in education that does not acknowledge the contributions of people of color to our societies. We have to, so that students from all backgrounds can see themselves represented in our curricula. We can't talk about the mashed potato without acknowledging the Charleston. And we can't talk about the Charleston without acknowledging that African Americans were dancing the Charleston way before it was popularized in the 20s. We can't talk about the bows in a chorus line without acknowledging the influences of the cakewalk. And we can't talk about the cakewalk without recognizing that it is considered the first American social dance. We can't talk about the father of theatrical jazz, Chad Cole, and acknowledge his contributions to the jazz dance form without acknowledging the matriarch of jazz, Miss Catherine Dunham, and her contributions to the edification of jazz dance as well. And we can't discuss Dunham's contributions without acknowledging how her choreographic body of work was invited to many prestigious theaters throughout the United States and the world. But at times, Ms. Dunham was not allowed to enter the theaters or the hotel she stayed at through the front door because of the color of her skin. My name is Wilson Mendieta. I am a first-generation immigrant from Colombia, South America, and I arrived to the States when I was 11. As an undergrad, I earned a BFA in acting and a minor in dance, but I must make known that my dance training didn't begin when I stepped into my first ballet class my junior year in college. That is a Eurocentric point of view. I started my dance training when my mom taught me how to salsa dance in her kitchen, when my aunts would blast the radio and would teach me the coordination of arms and shoulders and feet needed for vallenatos and cumbias, and they would cheer me on when I would dance a mapalé. My dance education began when at the end of a family gathering, everyone will sit and my mom would stand in the middle of the living room in a warm embrace with her older sister and dance a paso doble. Reflecting on those moments, it is easy for me to see that the need to infuse culture and history into arts education and develop new methods that build on the supernatural powers that dancers already have way before they step a foot inside a studio. To me, the entry point into dance education is technique, but most importantly, we need to learn how to define it. I would argue that most of us define it from a purely physical perspective. The anatomical correctness of the body, the proper placement, the construct of the physical body navigating space and rhythm and weight. But what about the soul? What about the individual's culture? I admit I poetically identify as one who looks at dance art as the mirror that reflects life back to the viewer. So if we're aiming to recreate life in the training of dance, then the dancers, the human, should be the guiding principle for how we examine material. This leaves us to approach dance education from the perspective that technique is the balance of the psychophysical and emotional connection of the artist to the material. And this approach will allow us to see the beauty of each of our students, a beauty that is informed by their specific cultures and their unique experiences, so that we will be able to applaud and cheer their individualized trial and error process as they develop their own expressive natures as artists and they learn to defy gravity themselves. And we'll be able to respect the individual and create space for each student so that their cultures and their own experiences can claim the righteous space in the room and in the world. In the process, we will arm our students with embodied knowledge and empathy needed for them to navigate this crazy world. So how do we teach it? And I think that's the tricky part. And as Britney just mentioned, I don't know everything. But I had been experimenting with a couple of different ideas, and I'd like to offer some examples that are not meant to be the final word, but just suggestions. I use this as the basic foundation to my teaching madness, I guess I should call it. One, if they're not getting it, maybe it's not them. I experiment with different ways of saying and teaching material, for information is processed differently by different learners. My job is not to ask the rest of the class to imitate Wendy. It is to guide students to discover for themselves what Wendy seems to be tapping into. Number two, clear expectations for the students. I did not become a teacher to be a cheerleader. Yay, come on guys, let's do it. No, I clearly state from the get-go, the gift bestowed upon artists comes with the weight of responsibility. As artists, we cannot waste the opportunity to hone our skills and become the illuminating unicorns needed to bring light into this world. So that means the student has to show up, and with their experiences and culture, they need to bring their day into the classwork. Three, create space for discussion about how each student is internalizing the work. For example, why do we clap after each group dances? Is it a culture of habit, or are we applauding something specific to celebrate? So I ask students, why did you clap? Who are you clapping for? What specific movement led you to clap? What did you like? How can you steal and borrow? How can you apply that concept into your own process? To me, these conversations are extremely important as they eradicate the notion that dancers are to be silent human beings. And number four, and probably for me, one of the most important ones, is the use of mirror as a tool for learning in order to avoid dependency on it, as I find it can be linked to issues of low self-esteem. I think any dance teacher can relate to seeing students in the corner of the room and frantically fix clothes and hair and sucking in their bellies. And when dancing, that inevitable glassy eye appears. That means students are disconnected from their instruments. So I engage them in exercises about external and internal visual landscapes. I teach material and turn them away from the mirror to provide opportunities for them to experience the material from a kinesthetically point of view. For example, I recently was working on some Latin phrase work with students at Chapman, where I teach. And we were facing the mirror. I taught them a basic salsa step. And then we talked about dancing on the one versus dancing on the two, the differences between salsa and mambo. I share my own take where I sense it in my body and how it feels and what shows have or should have this information in them. Then we faced away from the mirror and took the steps across the floor and asked them to experiment. Just find instruments in the music and put it in different body parts. The trumpets in the shoulders, the vocals in the arms, the percussion in the pelvic floor. I asked them to listen to the music and add to its orchestration with their own bodies. And all of a sudden, the culture of individuals surfaced. They interpreted the material informed by their own experiences. So later on, when learning the phrase, it was easier for me as an educator, for I was guiding the individual's gut instincts rather than only correcting the physical elements surrounding the complexities of the material. To me, that's just boring. I am learning that all these practices make it more challenging for the educator, Because by creating spaces for individual voices and cultures to live in, the students, they become the experts. But I believe these practices help set up our students to be self-actualized performers, and will inform them if they choose to also become directors, choreographers, teachers, arts administrators, the funders of art, audience members, and most importantly, the catalyst for positive change in the world. And that's when we, as educators, will hear our applause, encouraging us all to roll over and get up and just take one step more. Thank you for listening, and please wear a mask. I have the pleasure to introduce the next panelist, Leo Yuning Chang, performer and adjunct faculty at Marymount Manhattan College.
Thank you, Wilson. Hi all, my name is Leo Yuning Chang, he, him, his pronouns. I want to start this conversation with acknowledging the struggles that international students in the United States have experienced. Though the exemptions for non-immigrant students taking online classes in the fall was rescinded yesterday after numerous complaints and lawsuits against this controversial policy, still, there are countless battles that international students have to fight. They are one of the most courageous groups on earth, coming to a foreign land, relearning a brand new culture, language, living style, and even racism to pursue their careers. This January, I presented an MTA's annual conference on the struggles that international students have to go through in musical theater programs in the US. According to a survey that I conducted, about 70% of these international students are BIPOC and speak English as their second language. Almost every single one of them have experienced racial discrimination in their programs because of their skin tones, accents, appearances, or cultural backgrounds. What's more, they are living in the fear of their visa being denied or even get deported from the US. Myself, as an adjunct faculty in a college, I still have to fight for my right to stay in this country every single day. So I urge every school and educator to familiarize ourselves with policy about international students, strengthen the connection between your program and the international students office at your school. Listen to your students' need and support them in the best way you can. Because we are not here spending way too much money on tuition for any school or institution to check your diversity box. We're here for our dreams. I was born and raised in Taiwan, where 98% of the people are Han tribe. There's not much diversity. I never experienced racial discrimination nor the pronounced culture back home. Coming to America, facing a new country, new culture, and new language, I have made so many embarrassing mistakes, but that's how I learn new concepts and unlearn outdated and inappropriate traditions. And of course, the subject on international students in MT programs can be a webinar itself, so I'm not going to expand too much over here, but I want to invite those who are not familiar with racism and microaggression to treat them as if you are international students learning a foreign language. To increase the fluency in conducting inclusive language, we have to keep educating ourselves, keep learning and practicing, because there's no shortcut. So to ensure an inclusive learning environment for our students, we need to keep the conversation open. So I would like to offer and share a few tips that I found useful as suggestions. First, give students the authority to correct us if our languages or behaviors are not inclusive or appropriate. Just like Britney has mentioned, we all make mistakes, and some might be very uncomfortable to admit. And when we are confronted with conducting microaggressions or implicit bias, try not to defend ourselves first, even if the behavior was accidental. Instead, listen, acknowledge it, own up to it, and make it a teachable moment for everyone in the classroom. So I'm not saying that me as a person of color cannot be racist or haven't done or said anything that's racist. No, I have to admit that. I have made some racist comments in my life, and I had to learn from those lessons and make sure that they don't happen again. Second, preparing questionnaire. Before the first class of each semester, I send out a questionnaire to my students asking them to fill it out and bring it to the class. First, we have to use inclusive language. Instead of asking, what's your gender or ethnicity, we can ask, how do you identify your gender or ethnicity? Open questions are always better than giving them fixed options to choose. And then you might ask, what are the questions that we can ask? So I think this is the part that we can get a little creative, but the purpose is to understand our students a little bit more and allow them to have the space to share their stories with us if they feel comfortable. So I break them down into 3 different sections. The first would be preference questions, like what's your favorite food, or who do you admire the most and why? Then the second part would be musical theater oriented questions. Who is your favorite musical theater performer? What does musical theater mean to you, and why musical theater is important for our society? Then we come to goal oriented questions. What are your goals for this semester? What do you want to achieve? And what are your goals outside of the class this semester? So it's also best to address on the questionnaire that the information will not be shared without students' consent, and they don't have to answer these questions if they don't feel comfortable. And next, incorporating students' voice in choosing repertoires or scenes. On the same questionnaire, I asked my students to provide a list including at least 3 to 5 song choices that are appropriate for the era or genre that we are tackling during that semester. Among these choices, I asked them to list songs that you feel strongly connected to, and list songs or characters that you wish people can see you play. And I also encourage them to list songs or characters that are traditionally performed by genders and ethnicities with which they do not identify, as long as the song speaks to their heart. Then I encourage having a conversation before deciding the song choices. And of course, I don't always go with my students' choice. If I think the materials are not appropriate or not challenging enough or far too overreaching, I'll be honest with them and let them know why. So by doing so, they are part of this decision making and they feel much more connected to the songs. And I also encourage all of us to research and reach out to BIPOC composers and playwrights to find materials for our students. There are a lot of them out there creating amazing works. We might not know them just because those materials hardly get picked to be produced on Broadway, but they exist. So I'm urging MTEA and this committee to compile a database of BIPOC and LGBTQIA composers and playwrights. And we also can encourage our students to write and present their own stories in our classes. Next, we'll be choosing more inclusive reading materials, expand our textbook and article selections, include textbooks that are written by BIPOCs and female writers. Because for many years, empty books, especially history books, are written and told through white males' lenses. We cannot deny the merits of them, but we have to know that the authors can and have chosen their point of views and what to include and what to leave out. So my dear friend Ashley Espinosa recently started an online document for MT-related books written by BIPOC and female writers. So I believe that link will be shared in the chat shortly. But we found that very few MT books are written by BIPOC writers. So if you're in a position of power, how about creating a grant to encourage and assist BIPOC, LGBTQIA, and female writers to write about MT and history books? Just a thought. And then challenge the textbooks and shows. There's a very famous idiom in Mandarin. It's 尽信书不如无书, which means believing everything in books is worse than having no books at all. We need to train our students to have critical thinking and the courage to question and challenge what was written on the page and discuss with them what changes can we make. Then invite guest artists to our classrooms and institutions because we are not experts on every single area. And there are things that we might not get to experience at all during our lifetimes. So when you come across topics in your curriculum that you know someone who has more authority to speak from their own experiences, please invite them to share their wisdom with your students. And last but not least, like Britney mentioned, unlearn the habit of assumption. You'll be surprised by how many times I was asked if I knew Kung Fu. And when I say no, I was given the response, huh, interesting, with the subtext of, you should know, by people in our industry. We need to stop assuming because we don't know enough. We need to stop assuming our students who are Asian descendants all speak Mandarin, Japanese, or Korean. No, there are tons of language in Asia, and we might know more than one because we took the time to learn them. We need to stop assuming our Black students are riffers, even if they happen to be. And we have to stop assuming your only BIPOC student in the classroom is willing to take that spotlight and share their pains and experiences from racial discrimination to educate us. We have to put ourselves in their shoes. I'm only one voice, and we need all of you to join us. Use inclusive language, own up to our mistakes, and keep learning. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Chang. My name is Amanda, and I am the Secretary of the Executive Board of MTEA. I'm going to turn our attention to the Q&A. I believe we have a question for Professor Bonds. This question is from a lovely individual named Lauren. And the question is, how, speaking of the Once on This Island song assignment, how does a white professor do something like this? Can they do so respectfully? As a moderator, I'm going to reframe the question of talking us through some of the dynamics that you were speaking of in terms of using culture as a tool to investigate diversity when perhaps white professors may be coming from a different angle, and maybe some of those conversations you might have been privy to.
Sure, I think it is that exactly. Use it as a tool of teaching culture. You use it, you use it, it's not about teaching the music, because before you can teach the music, you have to go all the way back to where did it come from? What did the show come from? And if you use the moment as a cultural moment, then it's not about teaching the songs. Because once you teach the culture, the Haitian culture, and then you can sing the songs, rather than let's sing these songs.
Mm-hmm. Would anybody else like to chime in? Thank you, Professor Bonds, about that question. No.
It's always important that you are guiding students confidently. And so you cannot make apologies for the assignment. So if as a white instructor, you have determined that you are going to give the piece to a student of color in particular, then you have to do it with the same enthusiasm that you would share any other work from the golden era of Broadway. It cannot be presented as, so I think that we should probably sing this because you're Black. No, it has to be presented as, here's an extension of your responsibility as an artist. You are a storyteller, do your work, do your research, and learn the song.
Thank you, Marty. Would anybody else like to respond to that question before I move on? Great, thank you so much. Richard Rowland, hi Richard. Richard asked a question, I believe it's directed at Professor Mendieta. What if mirrors were removed or obscured for dance classes for a while? This may be in response to the anecdote that you told about teaching mambo salsa in different styles.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can negate the need for the mirror as a tool for the education of dance. I do believe, though, however, that we put a little bit too much emphasis, and then it causes the person to separate itself from its kinesthetic knowledge. One of the things that I think is really important to acknowledge is that we have to be sensitive about how students may see themselves or how they feel they're being seen by their communities. I mean, I think a person of color may have had this experience, and we know what it feels like to walk into a room and being incredibly aware that you are the only person of color in that room. So if all of a sudden you walk into a studio and you see that image and that sense reflected and magnified into a mirror, it takes a lot for the student to then show up, because now what he, she, or they had perceived as a reality is reflected back. So it's important to navigate the use of the mirror in different ways. There's a lot of great articles out there about its use. But I think we can't negate the fact that, especially in musical theater, the idea of clarity of lines and the use of unison in ensemble work is really important. And we can only arrive at that if we are experiencing it from a kinesthetic point of view, but also we're seeing it from an external point of view. I would just be cautious about letting that be the guiding decision on using the mirror the entirety of a semester or a class. Let them experience it. The ensemble are supposed to be people, humans, right? Mm-hmm. Cowboys, people out in Alphabet City. We're supposed to be those people. So we have to experience those cultures rather than purely the line.
Thank you so much. There are a couple that have popped in. So I'm going to go to a question. There's a statement and then it goes into a question by an individual named Nasir. As a Pakistani musical theater student, I very much understand feeling invisible and feeling like my culture is not valid or even acknowledged in the theater community. I often feel like people even believe I'm not capable of being as skilled as my white peers, if not actively, then subconsciously. I feel like I'm never seen for some roles because a director simply can't envision a South Asian man in that role. As a student and as a performer, how do you even get seen for the roles you believe you're right for? Is that even my responsibility? While I believe this question may be directed at Professor Chang, given the nature of the things that you spoke about, I'll let Professor Chang go first, but I would welcome any of the panelists to give some responses given their experience.
Sure, thank you for the question. If you're in front of me, I would like to clarify if you are talking about in the professional setting or the classroom setting. But in terms of professional setting, I would just encourage you to audition for every single show that you feel you're right for and keep showing up. Of course, sometimes that decision is not on us, right? But just like when we are presenting the song, why do we sing these songs? Why do we present these monologues? Because they resonate with me. So I encourage you, when you go to an audition, pick songs that connects to you and tell your own story instead of feeling like, oh, I'm audition. I believe I can be in Curly in Oklahoma, so I sing it the way that was written for Curly at that time. I encourage you to bring your background and bring who you are as a person who wants to tell that story into the story that you are telling, because that is unique and someone will see that. And I hope that answers part of your question.
Thank you, Professor Chang. Would anybody else like to chime in on this question in terms of being seen for roles, going in for roles, responsibility of that context?
So my first day in New York, after I finished grad school, met my parents at the Jacksonville airport, and I got into a taxi. I woke up the next morning, and my first audition was Cinderella. I went into the Actors Equity Building, and every day I challenged myself to audition for a role that I probably would not get, but it wasn't about that. It was about building the muscle to audition. So that's that. Auditioning, like any other skill, has to be polished and refined, and you learn the most when you go in for opportunities that you know are not creatively designed for you. Now, let's talk about creatively designed. That means that whomever that director is, they didn't want to do the work of reimagining a story to include you. It is not your responsibility. That director is complicit, and that director, in my opinion, should be ashamed of him or herself. And you should allow yourself to be free from that moment, because if you don't, you will begin to carry that into other spaces where people are not only pulling for you to do the best, but are available to reimagining all of the stories that we have so long been left out of. There would be no Broadway without racism. there would be no musical theater industry without racism. And it's your responsibility as a student to be prepared. It's our responsibility as educators to be prepared for the opportunity to change and reimagine the opportunity.
Thank you, Professor Lamar. Anybody else like to chime in before I move on?
If I may say one more thing,
Please.
fall in love with the audition process. It's yours. It's a fantastic opportunity for you to just fall on your face or just come out of that room flying. The decision making may not be yours, but you can choose to go in there and just make something of that for yourself. Fall in love with the process.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to another question. While I do, Professor Chang, we have a request in the question and answer. Can you repeat the open-ended question you use with your students to better understand their gender and cultural identity? Would you mind typing that into the chat to all panelists and attendees while we're moving on to the next question?
Sure,
That can be
will
helpful
do.
to some folks. Thank you. The next question, and this is for the entire panel of this section, when we have a scene study class with only one person of color and the person of color student has requested to work on a show that is mostly for actors of color, how do we support that student?
You do the work. And you go ahead and you do what the student has requested. It is not that the other students in the class will necessarily feel uncomfortable. It's your own uncomfortability that you have to work through. That's first. And then we go back to what a few of us mentioned on the panel, in that we explain to those students, this is so that you understand how to work through things culturally and so that you understand other cultures. No, you won't do it outside of this classroom. And that's okay. But in being a culturally responsible person in the universe and in the world, you all must do this work.
That was a great note. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Bonds.
When a student makes that request and it is ignored, it goes back to what I spoke to before, they become invisible. And it takes everyone else off the hook. Well, we don't have this, so we can't do this. Yes, you do. You have human bodies. We're talking about humanity. We're talking about human beings. So it's exactly what Brittany's saying. Do the work in the room, period.
And it's important that you do the work of understanding and discovering who the latest playwrights are, the latest playwrights of color, or the latest playwrights that come out of a wonderful trans or LGBTQI plus communities. It's important. And then you have to also say to your students, go pick up, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Why not? You be them, you be him, and we'll let her be her. And then let's have the conversation and how much more is available for you to discover as a result of having a mixed couple, two races coming together on top of all of the other wonderful drama inside that work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I see that a question has been upped to the top, but I'm going to stay on the scene study topic for a moment because we have the time. We're going to have this Q&A until 8:10. When it comes to scene study, I tend to ask my students of color privately, this is from an anonymous attendee, at the beginning of the semester if they have any preference over whether they are assigned material specific to their cultural experience or if they don't really care as long as they can connect to and relate to the material. In other words, do they specifically want to dig in to scenes by August Wilson, Terrell Alvin McCraney, etc., or do they prefer to work on a broad swath of material? Is it appropriate to ask them and put this in their hands?
What I have to say is really short. You can ask, but the material should be included either way. It's not that only persons of color should study that material. Everybody needs to study that material. It is not the burden of the one student of color to decide what your syllabus states. We must, as educators, challenge all of our students to work on all of the work.
Thank you.
Yes.
Professor Chang.
So may I chime in?
Please do.
So I also think what Brittany said is, wonderful. If you want to reach out to specific students about this question about repertoire, how about reaching out to every single student about what they would like to work on and open up as a conversation so that every single person's voice can be heard? Because sometimes we don't know their background. We might not know what their ethnicity is. So we might make some mistakes by doing so. So I would encourage all of us to expand that invitation to every single person instead of just one specific student in your classroom.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to participate in this answer before I move on?
I think the purpose of a play reading class or a play writing class in particular is to expose students to varied genres of dramatic literature. And so as a part of your work, that's what you do. In a musical theater course, it is just as important to understand the beginnings of My Fair Lady as it is to understand the nuance of Dreamgirls. We've allowed, we've allowed as instructors and educators to make Dreamgirls about one plus-sized sister of color screaming and yelling, and I'm telling you, and that ain't what the story is about. And so you have to put the same effort and energy into curating an opportunity for your students of non-color to understand the depth of stories of persons that may not be represented in the space. So if there are no persons of color in the course, that has nothing to do with you exposing them to the millions and millions and millions of articles, plays, readings that have been written about our presence in the canon, particular to musical theater.
Thank you. We're going to take our last question for this section in particular. We have 2 minutes. Michael Bertoli writes, for the panel, I teach voice and diction and am required to teach standard American stage dialect. How can I reconcile teaching a uniform dialect while still acknowledging the individual cultures of the students as valid? How do I avoid sending a message that invalidates them? I fully acknowledge this is not an answer that can happen in 2 minutes, but we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, really quick, for me, I think that there is always, you have to always have the conversation between the requirements and tools for the profession you are going into versus your everyday navigation of the world. And being able to speak in multiple dialects is synonymous with transformation. That is your responsibility as an actor. As an African-American male, we call it in the community code switch. It means that sometimes I walk into a room and I know how to present, to be regarded and to take up space. But when I am around my community, particularly those that grew up in Georgia, if you hear Britney and I talk off of these spaces, most of us wouldn't know what we were saying, but it's because we're both from Georgia. We understand the vernacular, we understand the extended ers and ahs, and that is what you honor. Then as an educator, you say, now, that's what we honor about you and your regionalism. But in order for you to be the most amazing artist, we have to learn this standard approach to language for your life as a performer.
And I
You have
believe
to
one
teach
of
the
the
food.
language that you
I'm
can
sorry.
use,
Yeah.
for example, yes, for example, for my own experience learning English as a second language, one of my professors told me, don't change your accent. Your accent is perfect, but we are working on the muscles of your mouth so that you can produce different kinds of sounds in order to portray different culture or, just have that skills in your pocket. But I think that also goes with what's the language that we use instead of saying, oh, you have a strong accent or your accent is not right. What kind of questions we can ask and how can we help our students to stretch that muscles? I think that would be very useful for students who, especially for students who are ESL.
Thank you.
If I may add to that, as somebody also with English as a second language, From the very get-go, my experiences of my accent became a way to placate my place in the room. I've heard even in high school, teachers say, you will never be cast on my stage with your accent. It had created this muscle memory that identified me as somebody who was restricted by my speech rather than my emotional capacity. So I really struggled trying to get rid of it or switch it, or I approached it from different angles, went to very reputable speech therapists in New York City, and I just could not get through it. I realized that when I started to own that, my career took off when I would walk into a room and actually make my accent a lot thicker. I would walk into voice-over auditions and they would say, oh, you make everything sound sexy. So in my head was like, well, is it sexy enough for you to give me the job? And then I would get the job. So then I learned to use that in ways for me to actually attract work, while at the same time, I would sometimes get involved with a group of creatives that would encourage me to try something new. So I understand the versatility that it brings to it, but if that is part of your DNA, I would say don't be afraid to use it as a tool to identify yourself and create a space for yourself in the business.
Thank you. Professor Bonds, you had something to say, yeah?
Yes. Teaching the techniques and the foundations of dialect, all of that is necessary because all of that is needed to build you as a whole person in the acting world. Absolutely. What happens is we walk in the room and don't really show you who we really are because we feel that you really don't want to hear our voice, and we have to put on your voice in order to be in the room. So the thing is to learn the skill sets, absolutely, but also encourage the voice from the person that you see to show up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is going to conclude this question and answer session because we have another session coming up. I'd like to give a friendly, and I mean very friendly, reminder to everyone that is attending. If you are posting comments in the question and answer section, we very much welcome your voice. We very much welcome everybody to read them. But after a particular amount of time, probably about 15 minutes, I'm going to be removing them from the question and answer section so that we can adequately see and clearly see what the questions are that are coming through. If you have some responses that you feel like the panelists may want to see in response to what you're hearing, you can use the chat feature to message all panelists, and maybe if that will inform some of their follow-ups or some of their additional thoughts, we certainly welcome that. I just want to let you know before you see certain comments disappear from the Q&A, we're doing that in order to streamline the experience of the webinar. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Matty. Maybe.
I think Matty's there.
Matty Miller.
Me.
There you are, Matty. Let me do a quick introduction just to set you up. Thank you again, everyone, from the first panel. It is my honor now to introduce Matty Miller from Chico State, who will be talking a little bit about what it means to be a member here at MTA.
Hello, friends. My name is Matthew Miller. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am one of the vice presidents of MTEA, this organization that I am so proud to be a part of. I'm also an associate professor of theater at Chico State, where I'm the musical theater program coordinator as well. I'm going to share my screen so you can see my fancy PowerPoint. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break between sections. So if you need to run to the potty, now's the time to do it, or refill your glass of wine, whatever you need. In the meantime, I'm going to tell you about Musical Theater Educators Alliance and what you get when you are a member of this organization, because we have a ton of guests with us tonight that might not know who we are and what we do. Musical Theater Educators Alliance is the only international network of musical theater educators that connect people teaching musical theater around the world. We currently have nearly 500 members. And when you are a member of MTEA, you get exclusive membership to our Facebook group, which is an incredible place to share ideas and resources, ask questions, anything from, hey, how many weeks do you talk about the golden age when you teach music theater history, all the way to, I need the libretto for Sweet Charity for a class project. Anybody got it? It's an incredibly supportive group of people, and that Facebook group is the place where we communicate the most. You also, as members, get to be listed on the most comprehensive musical theater training database accessible to prospective students for free. It's currently under construction, and it is going to be incredible, because what it will do is it will have a search feature so students who are interested in musical theater can describe the type of program they want to go to, and then the database will pair them up, match make them. There's no swiping left or swiping right. It'll just match make them with the programs that fit the criteria that they're looking for. It's going to be an incredible resource that you will definitely want to be a part of. There are two types of memberships, two primary types of memberships for MTEA. There's an institutional membership, which is $300 for everyone in your program, for all of the teachers, the chairs, the deans, whomever in your program, to all be affiliated with MTEA. That's $300 a year. There's also an individual membership that's $100 a year, whether you are a teacher at a university, at a high school, or have your own studio. That $100 a year is for the entire year. And that's the best bargain in the business, if you ask me. There are other member benefits too. Just quickly, you get discounted membership or discounted prices for the yearly MTEA conference. Every January, we do a conference. Last year it was in San Diego. The year before it was in New York. The year before that it was in Orlando. This year is going to look very different. You'll hear about that a little bit more later in tonight's webinar. But you get discounted prices to the annual conference, which is an incredible place to network with colleagues from around the country. Colleagues who do what we do, only in different places. We all know how insulated our departments can be. It feels so good to know people that do what we do around the country, that we can ask favors for or advice from. And I gotta tell you, some of my favorite people in the whole world, my closest friends in the whole world, I met through this incredible organization. One more thing that I want to tell you about that I think is really unique to MTEA is our Tenure and Promotion Mentorship program for junior faculty. As somebody who just completed the tenure process, I cannot tell you how important it was for me to have people around the country who could mentor me through the process, who could look at my dossier and give me feedback or write letters of support. This mentorship for junior faculty through the tenure and promotion process is invaluable, because many of us teach at universities where there aren't a lot of other musical theater people that know what a tenure portfolio a dossier should even look like. So that is really, really incredible. So if you want to be a member, if you want to learn more about membership, visit our website /membership. It is, like I said, the best bargain. And I've been a member now for 5 years for MTEA, and it has been such a worthy investment for me and my career, and ultimately for my students, because everything that I learn at the conferences and in our conversations, I bring back to the classroom, and my students ultimately benefit. So that is the end of my pitch. I'm going to hand it back over to Tim, who is going to introduce the next section of tonight's webinar. Thanks to everyone who worked on this webinar. So far, it's amazing. I can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you so much, Matty. And at this time, we're going to move away from the classroom and we're going to transition onto the stage, and we're going to talk a little bit about the rehearsal and the production experience. So to start us off tonight, it is my honor to introduce our first speaker. Please give a warm welcome to Kim Varhola from Kim Young University.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Varhola. I'm a professor here. I'm a professor in theater arts here at Kim Young University in South Korea. And I'm kicking off this segment on production. So at the conference in January, a question came up during the presentation about BFA programs. And the question was this: do young people need BFAs in order to become professional actors? And if a young person decides to forego the BFA route, then where do they get their education and their training? And many of us get our training by doing shows. Amateur theater, the high school musical. There are also a number of non-BFA students on our campuses who do campus productions and then go on to have professional careers in the theater. And so a significant part of our education and training is in the field, and it's hands-on. It happens on the stage, at the production table, at the lighting board. And so productions in of themselves are tools for educating. Now, the American musical is an overwhelmingly white art form. That's why we're here today, to discuss these issues. Creative teams, casts, have historically predominantly been white. And oftentimes, they are predominantly white without necessitating that the characters be white. The families in shows like Next to Normal and Dear Evan Hansen, these stories are about 21st century American families. And yet the original Broadway casts were entirely white, and subsequent casts continue to be almost entirely white. Not only have actors of color been deprived a meaningful participation in the American musical theater world, actors of color have often been denied roles that were actually written specifically for them. Ethnic roles that somehow get cast with white actors. It's a system called whitewashing. We know that the casting process is a complex one, and with limited student pools in our programs, it can be very challenging. But when we go about trying to fit students with parts, what is the process by which we do so? Do we subconsciously or consciously make casting choices based on image precedence or tradition? And if we are in fact casting according to image precedence, and the American theater has a precedence of being predominantly white, then how are we providing a meaningful opportunity for our students of color? Now, I choose the word meaningful on purpose because we all know in a show, not all parts are created equal. As time has progressed, we are seeing more diversity on our stages, but the problem is, most of the time, in a non-ethnic specific show, actors of color will be relegated to supporting roles and ensemble tracks. This is tokenism. My husband and I, we moved our family here to Korea 7 years ago. We're both in the business and we're both ethnically Korean. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine from the States was passing through Seoul. And so we got together and I took him sightseeing. And as we were chatting, he said, "So your husband's an actor?" And I said, "Yes, he's doing a show right now." And my friend said, "Oh, is he in the ensemble?" And I said, "No, he's the star." We have perpetuated tokenism so much so that our default response is ethnic Americans play supporting roles. Now, all parts in a show are important, but if we are continually putting students of color in secondary roles, we are in essence breeding token players, cultivating token players, which just perpetuates this cycle. So, if productions are tools for educating, then what happens when students of color don't get enough meaningful production experience? If they don't get enough meaningful production experience, they will not be prepared for the professional realm. If they are not properly prepared, they may be overlooked or considered not quite as good. If they are overlooked, they won't work. They won't be on stage. If they're not on stage, then audience members, and more pointedly, members from their own communities won't see them, if audiences of color and young audiences of color don't see actors that they can identify with, they may have doubts about working in the field. And if they have doubts about working in the field, they will not apply to academic theater programs. So what happens on our professional stages is directly related to what happens on our university stages and vice versa. So to illustrate this, I'd like to talk about the casting process for the original Broadway production of Miss Saigon. This casting process was a highly publicized event, and many of you may already be familiar with this story. But I'd like to use it now to discuss how educational stages and educational areas and spaces, how those spaces and professional spaces are connected. So in 1990, after a successful opening in London, Cameron Mackintosh announced that he was bringing Miss Saigon to Broadway. This was a very, very big deal for the Asian American acting community. Miss Saigon was a huge production, needing about 50 actors, and over 50% of them were slated to be cast with Asian Americans. Soon after the announcement for Broadway, Cameron announced that British actor Jonathan Pryce, who is white, would be reprising his role on Broadway as the engineer, a character that is Vietnamese. This caused an uproar within the Asian American acting community. Actors Equity initially refused the approval of the casting of Pryce, saying that they could not condone the casting of a white actor for the role. Mackintosh, of course, fought back and threatened to cancel the show. Now, Mackintosh went on to say, and this is the point I'd like to focus on, he went on to say that there was no Asian American qualified to play the role. This sentiment was supported by casting director Vinnie Liff, who said, if there were an Asian actor out there, we would have found him by now. There just isn't anyone good enough. Now, when they were casting the London production, the team did a worldwide search for the role of Kim. For those of you who have seen the documentary, The Search for Miss Saigon, the team traveled to New York City and then Los Angeles, and then they went to Honolulu, and then they ended up in Manila, Philippines, where they found Lea Salonga, and the rest is history. Now, the casting controversy of Jonathan Pryce is pretty well known. What isn't discussed, though, quite as much, is the casting of a non-American in the starring role of Kim. And when they cast the London production, not only did they bring Lea over from the Philippines, they also brought over her alternate, which means that the other Kim was also not American. So here we have 3 top slots in a new Broadway-bound musical featuring many Asian American or Asian characters, and none of them are American, and one of them is white. So what does that say about theatrical education for the Asian American in the States? In 1950, there were about 600,000 Asian Americans living in the US. When The King and I opened on Broadway in 1951, with the exception of Yul Brynner, who does have a bit of Mongolian ancestry, none of the other principal Asian roles were played by Asian actors. In 1970, the Asian American population increases to 1.5 million. So for the 1977 Broadway revival of The King and I, both the role of Tup Tim and the role of Lady Tiang were cast with Asian actors. The remaining principal characters were played by white actors. In 1980, the Asian American population continues to rise to 3.5 million. So for the 1985 Broadway revival of The King and I, none of the principal Asian roles were played by Asian actors. Let me say that again. None of the principal Asian roles were played by Asian actors. The Asian American population goes up, but representation goes down. So by the time Miss Saigon rolls around in 1990, it's no wonder that the talent pool is so small. Asian actors can't even get roles that were written specifically for them. Rather than cultivating a community, the powers that be are discouraging it. In the documentary, The Making of Miss Saigon, Chloe Stewart, one of the young actresses in Honolulu, is asked by the team to keep working on her craft, keep training, take class. We want to see you again. If there is viable opportunity, young artists of color will train. If there's viable opportunity, young artists of color will take class. And if there's viable opportunity, young students of color will enter our programs. That wraps up my portion of this segment. It is now my honor to introduce one of tonight's special guest speakers, Mr. Kent Gash, founding director of the new studio on Broadway, NYU Tisch School of the Arts.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And I'll jump right in. First of all, I'm founding director of the new studio on Broadway at NYU Tisch School of the Arts. I'm happy to report that we are a BFA musical theater program, and that our full-time faculty of professors, there are 7 of us total that are full-time. All 7 are Black, Latinx, or Filipino. The entire full-time faculty is a faculty of color. And we're often asked, how did that happen, or how, and I will say to you right now, it is intentional, and it happened because there is a plethora of extremely well-trained working professional artists who also want to give back and teach and at professional theater training level. And so here we are. 60% of our adjunct faculty is also of color. So I'm going to jump right into production and process. I want to say that I was an actor during the time that Miss Saigon was being cast in New York, and frankly was appalled because I knew that there were artists that were colleagues, people I had gone to school with, who were more than ready to jump into Miss Saigon. So we have still a great deal of work to do. I want to talk about something in terms of process and production of musical theater in our programs and in musical theater training programs. You know, when we were auditioning, and it really goes back even to selecting the production, ask yourselves, if you will, why am I selecting this production? How does this production speak to this moment in time? How does this production serve the community of students who will be auditioning for this production? What collectively may we make? What kind of theater will we make of the given production, and how will it serve the community of students, parents, faculty, and surrounding audience? Who will it serve in the doing? Why is it vitally important that that piece be done? What are its pedagogical imperatives, and how will it serve students' training, but also how will it serve them as human beings? I think often we don't ask this question, particularly in the musical theater. And it's a vitally important question to ask. It's the same question that we ask and that I ask in my work as a professional director. Why must this piece be done right now? What will it say to audiences? How will it speak to us? How will we serve it? How do we bring our humanity to it? In the audition process, I think it's critically important as students are auditioning that you're asking to hear not only perhaps a selection from the play or from the world of the music of the play when they're coming in to sing, but also that you're asking them to pick a selection on their own and asking them to sing something that they love to sing, of any genre, of any kind of music, but something that they truly love to sing. Because finally, in the audition process, what the creative team must do is get to know the actor. We think we know students when we're in class with them, but often they will surprise us. We must, as Professor Bonds so eloquently put it, we must meet the student where they are and identify with them and understand and see them as they are, where they are. Before we try to see them as Desiree in A Little Night Music or as the MC in Cabaret, who are they as human beings? What is their authentic voice? What do they create from? What do they make music from? We as artists, the fodder of our humanity, who we are, how we've moved through the world, how we've experienced life, is the fodder from which we make our work. One of the things that I think can be very important is for all of us as professors, as directors, as creatives in the room, when we're in rehearsal and making work, as you begin a process, I normally try to introduce myself. The students, a lot of our students know me and have already been in class with me, but in our classes and in our rehearsal processes, we often begin by introducing ourselves, saying our preferred pronouns. Mine are he, him, his. And I will then share that I identify as a member of many communities. I'm Black, and I am a member of the LGBTQIA community. And I am always those things. Those things never leave the room when I'm in a creative process. And all of my humanity must be brought to bear on the creative process. We must make space in the rehearsal room for all of the students' humanity, all of the artists' humanity, to be welcomed into the room. Our common ground begins in the research and interrogation of the play that is going to be produced. How do we examine the score? How do we examine the text of the play? How do we examine the source material of the play? We did Cabaret earlier this year in the new studio on Broadway, and it was wide open to everyone to audition for. Our MCs were double cast. One was Latinx, one was Asian American. And then we went into the research by looking at film of the rise of the Weimar Republic, by looking at Berlin, understanding the Berlin cabaret scene as a whole event in culture and in history, deeply understanding the economics of Berlin at the rise of Nazism. All of these things become extremely important. How does the student enter into the world of the play, bringing all of their humanity into the world of the play? Those students who are students of color don't suddenly become white because the play is happening in Berlin. When we did a production of Tommy, there was an African-American Colonel Walker. And in rehearsal, the second day of rehearsal, he said to me, "So am I Black? And I was like, you most certainly are." And then we went through all of the research and all of the documentaries about the Black section of the RAF in World War II, about what it was to be Black British in England at the time that Tommy takes place, what it meant, what it all meant, and what are the various ways that someone occupies the world, again, the world of a play like Tommy, or the world of a play like Cabaret. In every piece that we do, in our research, in our table work, in our interrogation of the text and of the score, we are making space for every young artist, every student, every actor to bring all of their humanity into the process, because that humanity is how they will discover how the play lives in them. As a director, as a choreographer, as designers, all of us who are making the play must forget about trying to recreate the original Broadway cast of anything or the film version of anything. Give it up, let go, it's been done. If you're going to do it again and you're going to do it right now, why did the community at NYU need to see Cabaret in 2020? Well, there are a lot of parallels between where Berlin was and where we are right now as a country. Why look at Tommy, for example, or why do a piece like Working? We did Working in part because I wanted our students to step into something that had nothing to do with show business, to step into something that was about real people living their lives. And the thing that most of us spend most of our time doing is working. So the examination of what the students might need pedagogically, what pieces might speak to that, what pieces might serve that, how will we give them the richest possible performance experience? I have to say that embracing and understanding questions around identity, asking those questions, being willing to step into the most uncomfortable aspects of it. You know, there's such a thing as artistic discomfort. And I think it's extremely valuable for the artist to seek out what they don't know, to do the things that make them uncomfortable, to step into, we're always talking about taking artistic risks. Well, really what that means is not constantly affirming the status quo of what you already know, but in fact, seeking out that which you do not know. Challenging all assumptions, challenging your own assumptions about yourself in the creative process, and certainly bringing no preconceived ideas or assumptions to the students as you engage them. I do think that this question of research and how we begin, even in the choosing of the material in a production, is extremely important. And not asking students to make sure and sound like, or make sure and do it like, you know, if we want to hear Bernadette Peters' Dot, we can hear it and see it right now if we choose to. So let's not burden students with any of that. Where does Dot live in the student that you finally cast in that role? And ideas about, oh, realism, or, oh, there wouldn't have been Black people or brown people here or there. You know, with all due respect, do your research. We must do our research, because if we dig, if we look, you can find where the lines historically allow for all of that. And we are not in the business of realism. Musical theater is not realism, let's be clear. It is a heightened form of expression, and so everything about it is artful. What is the truth, the human truth within that artistry? Our sense of understanding and questioning around representation, around the various phobias and isms that are inherent within the musical theater, our engaging these questions is very important. I'm not saying there are pieces we should never do, but if we are doing a piece that we know carries a history of challenging attitudes towards women, towards Black people, towards Latinx people, towards Asian Americans, we have to really ask ourselves, why are we doing that piece? Why must we do that piece? And how are you going to speak to the student community about and justify the doing of that piece? If you are not of the central ethnicity or culture or race that the piece is about, can you make sure there are representatives on the creative team who are of that culture, who represent that culture, who are a part of that culture? And can you, in fact, give the student actor the voice of authority in terms of saying straight up, look, I am not of your culture. And if I'm asking you to do something, or the piece is asking you to do something that feels false, that feels untrue to who you are and what you know your cultural experience to be, I want to be told. And we have to find a way to make sense of that so that you can step onto the stage proudly and own the work that you are doing. And if we can't arrive at that, then there's some deeper questions about why we chose to do the piece and should we be doing the piece. I want to encourage authenticity and the embracing of authenticity. So we're not asking people to sound somehow different or to become something totally foreign to their life and human experience, but in fact, that we are building our work, building the play on the people who are in the room, that we are making the newest, most exciting, most vivid, most rich theatrical work based on who is in the room, all of their truth, all of their life experience, and that we are making space consciously and intentionally for every student, every actor to be celebrated in the work and for them to stand in their authenticity and in the truthful evocation of their humanity in every aspect of our work. This is what will engage our audiences. This is what will engage all of us. This is the opportunity for our students to teach us, to make our work better, to make our work essential, so that our work reflects the world that we live in and speaks to the world and the time that we live in right now. I think I am out of time, so it is my pleasure to now introduce to you Dr. Autumn West, who is an assistant professor of voice at Oklahoma City University. Thanks, Autumn.
Thank you so much, Kent. Hello, everyone. I first want to thank everyone on this panel. From the conversations that we've had in preparation for this webinar to tonight's presentations, you have just been so filled with insight and wisdom, and I have learned so much, and I thank you for providing me the space to do that. Hi, my name is Dr. Autumn West. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am an assistant professor of voice at Oklahoma City University. And I'm going to talk about an initiative called the CARE Coalition and its pilot chapter at OCU called OCU CARE. OCU CARE is a new organization on our campus. We've been active for about 5 months. It's an organization that exists outside of the classroom, rehearsal, and performance spaces, but includes people who are active in all of those spaces and is intended to better all of those spaces for our students of color and for other marginalized groups on campus. So the history of how CARE came to be involves a key player by the name of Sherry Sanders. If you don't know her work, Sherry Sanders is a sought-after pop rock specialist and runs the program Rock the Audition. She's also been an outspoken ally and advocate for marginalized performers for years. And this past semester, we worked together with her, rocked the audition and our students and faculty to develop the pilot chapter of, as I said, a national initiative called the CARE Coalition. So I'm going to screen share and share a bit about the CARE Coalition. Okay. So CARE stands for Creatives for Artistic and Realistic Equity. A brief conversation that we've already touched on a bit, but just to reiterate, the difference between equity and equality. Equity would be the sameness of resources provided to everyone versus, I'm sorry, equality would be the sameness of resources provided to everyone versus equity, which is intentional distribution of more resources to populations who need them. So people coming from disadvantaged backgrounds or people who are members of marginalized communities. The CARE Coalition is a vehicle for hearing and empowering our marginalized students, establishing intersectional allyship and creating change in our own programs and across campuses nationwide. The organization is intended to give our students an opportunity to express their needs and then seek real and tangible change to have these needs met. Our mission is to foster and maintain a safe environment where our marginalized students can be heard and to implement action in order to educate our community and ensure equitable opportunity for the marginalized groups at Oklahoma City University and in the performing arts as a community as a whole. So in our efforts thus far, OCU CARE has mobilized a lot of members from our community, students, of course, faculty, advisors like myself, alumni, staff from our counseling services department, our VP of Diversity and Inclusion, Dr. Talia Carroll, as well as industry leaders. And we currently house 4 branches of advocacy, LGBTQIA+, disability, neurodivergence, and accessibility, mental health and wellness, and of course, race and ethnic diversity. And these branches may grow as the needs of our student population are heard and adapted to. In the 5 months that OCU CARE has been active, our students have already done so much. So I'd love to give you an introduction to the kind of actionable steps that we've begun to implement on the topic specifically of race and ethnic diversity. So some examples of initiatives that we're working towards on our campus include a social media campaign to provide education and resources on the topic of race, certifying members of our student body and our faculty with mental health first aid to care for our marginalized populations, and especially at the moment for our students of color. Meeting with our deans to request a commitment to bring BIPOC alumni and guests from master classes for presentations, as guest directors for our productions, as guest conductors for our concerts and more. And as we can establish, as we establish a commitment towards a longer term goal of hiring an equitable number of faculty members of color. Another initiative will be hosting a series of open discussions for the fall semester that will bring together students and faculty on the topic of race with the aim of creating an open space to ask questions, to learn, and to grow an understanding of the needs of our students of color together. Another initiative, having open discussions with our directors, both of whom have been active and work with CARE, about the intentionality of season programming and the intentionality of widening the lens through which we cast our students. We are also creating a space called the Color Cabaret, which is modeled after the performance series of the same name begun at the University of Michigan. And the Color Cabaret provides a performance space for students of color that is entirely their own, to perform the stories that speak to them on their own terms, to express the depth of who they are as individuals. It is a space to celebrate diversity and identity and to honor their experiences. We acknowledge, and it's been said many times even tonight, that the lens of the canon of musical theater is a white one. We need to change this. We need to invite more people of color to the table at every level. We need to reimagine the current canon in a way that speaks to today. We need to choose our seasons intentionally to today. We need to cast our students in ways that honor their experience and their identity. And we can also provide them with equitable and additional performance opportunities and spaces to speak their stories, like the Color Cabaret. And if you are a university or an organization who might be interested in creating a chapter of the CARE Coalition at your school, we would love to have you. The materials I presented today are a part of a guide, are a part of a guide called Creating Care, graphics by OCU Care's wonderful student president, Nasser Panjwani, who's actually been active in our Q&A. Huge thank you to Nasser. And the full materials will be a part of your takeaway resources tonight, including information on how to contact us after tonight. And I think now we're going to move on to the next section, which is our next round of Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Autumn. OCU Cares is great. Sherry's here. We know. We love you, Sherry. Thanks for being a part of the fam. I know she's here. So great. We have some questions in the queue for this particular group. There are some questions still lingering from the last section, but we might be able to keep those for the end for everyone to answer. So let's start with some of the stuff that you were talking about, Kent Gash. Hello. We're also happy you're here. Hi from Atlanta. We miss you.
Okay.
Okay.
Y'all too.
Right. So I'll give you this question because it was in relationship, and I'm curious about it too, about talking to students about identity, etc. I have recently experienced other MT coaches, musical theater coaches and directors, assuming the race and background of actors based on the way they look rather than learning about who they are. This worries me, as this means we are not getting to know actors as human beings. I'm wondering if you could suggest ways on how to approach learning about an artist's cultural background without offending them, or quote unquote litmus testing them in audition and class settings. This is a two-parter. There's another question about how to address clarifying backgrounds and identities in the professional world as well. Since we all know, and I will as a moderator kind of step in here, we all know that there are some people of various backgrounds that don't present that background on stage, right? Or in the room. And so what are the most sensitive ways for educators? Let's start with educators, but perhaps as educators, as casting directors and directors to dive into that in a way that is intentional, but not offensive.
Well, in our classes and, in a process within the university context, I always like to, on the first day of class, we sort of all introduce ourselves. And I propose that as we're getting to know each other, and on the assumption that even if we've been working together for a couple of years, maybe we know each other, maybe we don't, I will say my name and that my pronouns, and that I identify as a member of many groups. One of the groups I left out in the quick conversation earlier was that I'm also born and raised in Denver, Colorado, and I weirdly feel like a Western guy, which is very odd, but it's a part of it's in my DNA. And it's always shared with the idea that please share with the group what you are comfortable sharing, which takes the onus off of, oh, I have to come out now if I'm trans, or if I'm negotiating and thinking through, and I'm on my own journey with that relationship. You never want to force anyone to do anything that they're not ready to do. And I think professionally, you can't ask somebody what they are, quote unquote. Well, you don't get to do that.
Right.
And we've all had those sort of ugly experiences, because I was an actor in another life. People are like, oh, well, can you be more urban? Can you be more Black? And, I finally said to a couple of casting agents and directors, can you find another actor? I will not, because in that moment, I know everything I need to know about whether or not I want to be in a room with you. And guess what? It's a two-way street. I'm not driving my car into that street with you. I don't care who you are. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And in that moment, those teams learned maybe that's not a thing you ask people. Right. So, I think you have to really get to know people and get to know their work. And in an audition process, that's not something you can ask somebody, you know?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dr. West, would you like to chime in, or you want to? Sorry, Dr. Vahala.
Yeah, the Asian American acting community is a very interesting one because we've sort of been placed in the States, we've been placed into this one category called Asian American, but in reality, we all are different ethnicities. We come from Korea, and Japan and China and the Philippines, and not only those are different ethnicities, those are different cultures, those are different languages. And so, but the canon of Asian American musical theater is so small, we get lumped into, this one category and are viable for like the same shows all the time. And I think that there's often an assumption that, if I'm going to do Flower Drum Song, well, you're Asian American, you know what's going on here. And it's like, no, I don't. I'm not Chinese. I'm not Chinese American. So the assumption that just by what you see on the outside is going to be known by a specific participant, by a specific student or actor is false. And so like many of my colleagues have been talking about, you have to do your research. You have to really understand what story you're telling and where that's coming from. And then, of course, don't make assumptions just based upon an outward image of who you're seeing in front of you in the space.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question. It's not in the chat, but it was sent to me by one of our panelists, and the panelists can't put in the chat, so I'm going to read it. I have a question that I'd love the panel to respond to, but because I'm a panelist, I can't answer your question. My university has a diverse student population, and I'm reading this because I know a lot of educators have this question on their minds, but currently lacks a diverse teaching faculty. We recognize that this is a problem, and as soon as the budget crisis in our state is resolved, we intend to actively change this. To serve our diverse student actors, our faculty has been programming main stage productions that feature characters who are written to be people of color. Is doing productions written for characters who identify as people of color, casting it appropriately, but with a white director and design team, contributing to the culture of white supremacy, ? Because until our provost grants us a search, it is either that or not do them. Also, our union won't allow us to bring in guest teachers or directors, because I know as I read that question, I said, well, fork the money over and hire a guest. But here's the individual situation. The professors who have done so have worked very hard to do the work, but have recently been met with anger from a number of our alumni. So you can hear the conundrum at hand. Do you have any thoughts about that?
In part, I would suggest if there are students of the culture that you're engaging in the material, if there are students of the culture that have interest in working at all on the other side of the footlights, I would really suggest that you bring them onto the creative teams as associates. Mm-hmm. And, I would also be going to and encouraging the student population to go directly to the president of the university, the provost, the dean, and say, enough is enough. This has got to change. This is unacceptable. And basically, there are people who really are not skilled at doing something that are doing it. And because there's a deeper interrogation too, like just because there are Black bodies on stage, those are not necessarily authentically Black roles just because they've been played by Black actors. When the creative team that's writing it is white, I mean, I love Oscar Hammerstein to death, but Joe and Queenie, that's not, and there's a lot of work for actors of color to step into some of those parts. So, there's a lot to be considered here. But my first suggestion is engage the students fully as you can on the creative team and then encourage the students to go directly to the people of power in the university and say, this has got to change.
I concur with that. Other thoughts and solutions in that scenario?
I'll just reiterate, absolutely empower your students to speak on the matter. Obviously, you are very aware, and your students likely are as well, but I think the combined power of members of the community and allies, the combined power of students and faculty can really get things done and can work against a system. So work with them, talk to the people and make change.
My one other thought, students' parents need to call and or write, because often when nobody else can make change and get to the parents, who are the people who are writing the checks, I mean, if this is an American university, you have to go to the money, because the money drives everything.
And successful alumni.
Right. So you go to the successful alumni, you get the parents on the phone and saying, maybe I'm going to take my child out of that university and send them somewhere where this is not a problem. So what are you going to do now? Or I'm withholding that gift that I was going to give to the alumni fund. I'm not giving you that now until you do something about this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your answers. Just in the interest of time, we're going to have to move on, but I will say again to thank you to our wonderful panelists of this section. Thank you to all three of you. And also to those of you that still have questions sitting in the Q&A. Some of them are a little broader, so we might be able to tag them on at the end when we welcome a larger audience or a larger panel.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And as we get ready to transition into our third topic of the evening, we're going to take a little breather. And during this space, we're going to talk a little bit about our conference and our journal. So it is my honor to introduce Jacob Brent from James Madison University, our Vice President of Conferences, who's going to talk a little bit about our upcoming January conference. Jacob?
Thank you, Tim. Oh my gosh, what an amazing night of sharing. I just thank all the panelists and everyone here for sharing your wisdom with us. I know I'm writing things down as fast as I can. I'm listening, I'm taking it all in. And to me, this is just what MTA is all about. It is about educators coming together. We are not selfish with our knowledge, and we are sharing with each other. We're building this community, this amazing community, so that we are able to go out and share it with other people, because musical theater is a passed down art form, and that is what we do. We're passing it on. And so one of the things I'm most excited about is not only these webinars that were happening, but the annual conference that we will be having in January, which is so exciting. So usually we go to New York or every other year, and we have these the conferences in New York, but this year we were slated to go to New York, and we just, as an executive board, just decided that this year was probably not the best idea to go to New York. So we have decided to take our conference virtually. This is a virtual live conference, so it's going to be a little different than a webinar, which is tonight, which is more of you're watching a box and people are talking to you. This will be through Zoom, so we will be able to see all of you. We will be able to connect with each other. And in planning this, I'm realizing that there's so much that happens in our conferences that can really translate to a virtual space. And so I'm excited to be able to explore that and work with you and have that with you. This year's theme is putting it together, rebuilding, redesigning, and reconnecting musical theater education piece by piece. We really felt like we wanted to use these webinars that we've been having as building blocks for the big conference in January. The fall is going to look very different for a lot of us. For all of us, it's going to look different. Our industry has been turned upside down, and it is our job sort of now to put this back together. And I'm so excited to have that moment in January to just like get through the fall semester, come together, check in with each other, and be like, how'd you do? oh my gosh, and have that boost of inspiration that I need in January to then go into that spring semester. So I'm super excited about it. The conference is, yes, the conference is, you're able to, as a member, the conference costs $75 for 2 days of content. Which I don't know about you, but if you're a member of other organizations, it's pretty inexpensive for a conference. So super excited about that, and go ahead and click on the website and you can join the conference. So this year we have, and other years we've had keynote speakers. We've had George C. Wolfe came one year in New York, and we also have had Lynn Ahrens. These are two people that come to mind. We're working on our keynotes for this year, but what we really need is you. We need you to be a part of this conference. We need your expertise. We need your sharing of your ideas. And so we encourage you to submit a proposal to present. This can be a solo presentation. This can be two people joining up together. We have a panel. You could maybe want to host a panel, put the panel together, and be able to talk about things in more depth. But that is where we are right now with the conference. And so we're looking at it. The call for proposals is live. It is on our website, musicaltheatereducators.org. Go on there. If you have any questions whatsoever about what should you present, if you have, does this idea work? Is someone else working on this? Can you pair me up with someone? Do you know anybody? I would love this panel, but I need another panelist. Do you have anybody in mind? I'm happy to work with all of that and help you through. So just email me and we'll get you connected, and that's it. Oh, one more thing that's really exciting is on the third day on January 7th, we are having a just for voice teachers. Raymond Sage has designed this half day of content just for voice teachers. So if you come to the conference, pay for the conference, then you get that extra day. If you are a voice teacher or someone that teaches voice and interested in that, it would be a really great day of sharing. That's it. Go on the website. Click the things. I can't wait to see all of you there. We are so excited. It's going to be a great 2 days of conference. We also have a really awesome journal that Amelia Rawlings Bigler is going to talk to you about. So I'm going to hand it over to her. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amelia Rawlings Bigler, and I'm currently editor-in-chief of the Mtea Journal. And so the first thing I'd like for everyone to do, if you haven't done it, is to go to our website, musicaltheatereducators.org, and download the most recent version of the journal, which was published in January 2020. And in that journal, you're going to find a wide range of peer-reviewed articles, interviews, feature submissions, book reviews, and more, not to mention the absolutely gorgeous photography. So go check that out. We're also currently accepting submissions for the 2021 journal, which is set to come out in January of 2021. And so I also want to encourage any of you who might be interested in submitting for the journal to also visit our website for more information. And you simply just go to the website, click journal. There's a little box that says want to be published, and that link will take you to the guidelines for the journal, the potential subject areas, the guidelines for submission, etc. And that's also where you're going to submit the work should you be interested. Our focus for the journal is primarily college level, but we also welcome submissions pertaining to the professional career or other topics that might be relevant to our membership and mission. So check out those subject areas online. We have extended the deadline to July 31st. So I know that is great for most of us because you get an extra 16 days. So if you're interested, visit our website for more information and send in your submission by July 31st. All of the information is online. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me through the email journal@musicaltheatereducators.org if you have any questions. And I'm also going to post that email address in the chat so you can just easily click it and go ahead and shoot me an email right now. So we would definitely love to have you submit, and definitely just check out the journal. It's full of great information. And now I'm going to send the baton back over to Tim, and thank you so much. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Amelia, for those wonderful words. And now we are going to transition into our final topic of the evening. We're going to be talking about the college audition and recruitment process. And next up, it is my honor to introduce our second distinguished speaker this evening. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Adriel Hilton. Adriel Hilton is the Dean of Students and Diversity Officer at Seton Hill University. Adriel?
Good evening. Theater of the Oppressed, Examining the Feelings of Being Trapped. Founded in 1999, the Mandela Center for Change is a multidisciplinary arts and education organization dedicated to community dialogue, social justice, societal healing, and transformation. One of the methods used in this work is that of Brazilian theater visionary and Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Augusto Boal. Boal's Theater of the Oppressed is a form of popular community-based education that uses theater as a tool for social change. I'm certain that the majority of you are aware of this work and its international effect on issues of race, gender, and sexual orientation. This work was inspired by the Pablo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. So in the theater industry and classroom, we have a responsibility to show everyone what the world could be through what was imagined and what we imagine as practitioner scholars. As Pablo Freire mentions, one cannot expect positive results from an educational or political action program which fails to respect the particular view of the world held by the people. Such a program constitutes cultural invasion, good intentions notwithstanding. This session will show how we often fail our students and viewers of our creativity by trapping them in roles or excluding them. So I'm Adriel Hilton, Dean of Students and Diversity Officer at Seton Hill University in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. In the past, I served as Chief of Staff and Executive Assistant to the President at Grambling State University in Louisiana. Also as Assistant Vice President for Inclusion Initiatives at Grand Valley State University and Executive Assistant to the President, Chief Diversity Officer, Assistant Secretary to the Board of Trustees at Upper Iowa University. I did my undergrad studies at Morehouse, my master's at Florida A&M, my PhD at Morgan State University, and did an MBA at Webster University. I'm excited to be with you all this evening. During this session, participants will have the opportunity to list the promising practices for diversifying enrollment, engagement, and employment of theater students, explain barriers to equitable classrooms, casting, and productions for marginalized community members in theater, apply tenets of critical race theory and intersectionality to curriculum development and institutional engagement for marginalized community members. So as we navigate this session, it remains imperative to know how diversity, equity, and inclusion differs, while also knowing their limits as well. So we bring in liberation theology as an emphasis to consider in removing all forms of oppression. So liberation theology is a synthesis of Christian theology and socioeconomic analysis based on far left politics, particularly that emphasizes social concern for the poor and political liberation for oppressed peoples. So of course, I'm not, speakers prior have noted what it was equity, what is inclusion, what is diversity. So I won't go through that, but you all see the terms there. And of course, equity, inclusion, and diversity are what we strive for. It's important to also understand how Viola Davis eloquently gives a quick description of being trapped in a recent interview on USA Today in the Academy, and she noted as minoritized populations as a Black woman, also on the stage, as well as in television. These same sentiments are what our marginalized community members experience in the academic programs. So scholars have noted that there is both biases in hiring and admission to our highly selective programs. Like hiring bias, a practice of discriminating towards workplace hiring. We need to investigate admissions bias in theater programs, and as scholar practitioners in these areas, we must understand how our implicit biases show up in policy, curriculum, lectures, casting, rehearsal, and productions. As a quick takeaway, schedule focus groups with marginalized community members with intentions of employing 2 or more comments into future practices at your institutions. More importantly, consider the follow-up process with the same group of students by letting them know of the status of their feedback. How are we challenging our institutional policies and personnel to identify our implicit bias in the admissions process? And as much as these biases place a continuation or exclusion towards marginalized community members, these feelings of being trapped in the classroom and industry mirror the same feelings marginalized communities experience in society. These manifestations are harmful. We have identified bias in admissions programs through gender and gender identity and expression, race and ethnicity, disability, national origin, as well as religion. So when you return to their campuses, how has your program practiced diversity, equity, and inclusivity in their promising practices, or what are best practices that you all are practicing at your institutions? Ask yourself and your department head, when was the last time you updated your curriculum, expectations for your departments? In the revisions of these curriculums, who are the primary authors, spokespersons to your students? Do these voices portray the same ideas and beliefs of your student populations? If not, consider what that would be like. Your teaching and your approach to teaching should always mirror your student population. So I spoke earlier in reference to doing focus groups, and as a critical race theorist, that's the lens from which I work and write my scholarship through critical theory. So we use qualitative research, we do focus groups, interviews, stuff to that nature, to hear the voices and the narratives of those marginalized persons that experience, and to get their lived experiences, phenomenology in the classroom or on the campus or stuff to that nature. So there's a host of identity or theoretical frameworks that can be employed when you all do this work. Jackson's Black Identity Development, Cross's Theory of Nigressence, Thomas's Concept, and Patricia Hill Collins' Black Feminist Thought, and of course, Queer Theory. Queer theory looks at the creation of new ways of thinking, not only about fixed sexual identities, such as heterosexual and homosexual, but also about other essential notions such as sexuality and gender, and even man and woman. Black Feminist Thought, Patricia Hill Collins, describes Black women as a unique group that exists in a place in US social relations where intersectionality and intersectional processes of race, ethnicity, gender, class, and sexual orientation shape Black women's individual and collective consciousness, self-definitions, and actions. And of course, tied to Cross's theory and Jackson's Black identity development, those are various stages where young people of color through history are victimized by racism and white supremacy. Psychological adaptations instigated identity formation for persons of African American descent. So we also want to talk about the recruitment So we hear a significant number of times, and you see in the higher ed literature that there are not a significant number of students of color that are in these types of programs or in these roles. So denying ourselves the ability to see color ignores the creative imaginations that lies within marginalized community members. Since Western civilization is a heavily racialized society, we limit every aspect of race while also capitalizing off it. In our recruitment efforts, we must recognize and acknowledge our student differences, because these differences bring a unique level of imagination. It is this imagination that will continue to fuel our industry. So changes to consider: strategically plan for open dialogue about racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression that impact your institution. And in reference to the culmination of our hard work during this session, and within our immediate changes within our respective programs, are to identify the ways in which oppression overlaps. Thus, production is vital to showing both the narrative of these oppressive tendencies and ways to overcome them. We must recognize intersectionality as a key method to add the final tenet of this conversation. This is where liberation theology begins to be manifested, to first recognize the interconnectedness, plan, and move. So understanding the cultural norms differ across communities and seek to learn from the perceived differences. Be specific as to your production's casting needs, and this has already been noted prior. What is necessary for the role? How inclusive can you be? What story will that tell? So how can you incorporate liberation theology into your academic program? As noted prior, liberation theology is a synthesis of Christian theology and socioeconomic analysis based on far-left politics, particularly that emphasizes social concern for the poor and political liberation for oppressed peoples. So how are we servicing minoritized populations on your campuses or at your institutions or in the work that you do? How are we ensuring there is space for minoritized communities in your academic programs? And how are we having brave conversations with our students as well as your peers and your colleagues at your institutions? I look forward to the question and answer session. My contact information is present, and I'll share my email in the thread as well. It's great to meet each of you.
Thank you very much, Adriel. And at this time, we are going to move forward. I'd like to re-welcome Marty Austin Lamar, who is going to bring some insight about the college audition and recruitment process. Marty?
Thank you, Tim, and good evening to everyone again. Howard University offers the only musical theater concentrated BFA on the campus of an historically Black college or university. As I enter my 5th year on the faculty, I understand and understood pretty quickly that my responsibility as an educator and leader would be to create communities of diverse artists that possessed a wide range of talent and training. For example, in a class of 15 entering our program, it is very possible for us to have 4 students that have studied classical voice for the last 10 years. Have 2 students that have never had a ballet course, but are fluent in West African dance. We can have 5 students that have attended predominantly white secondary institutions studying with white vocal instructors, and we can have 4 students that have never studied voice, dance, or acting, but have the passion and effort necessary to successfully matriculate through a challenging program. As you consider your audition practices, especially during these very challenging times when we are faced with a health pandemic and the pandemic on race and culture in these United States, it is extremely important that as a faculty, as a department, as leaders in our field, that we are clear about the differences between talent and training. So let's throw away a few myths that plague our industry and unfortunately have space in our classrooms. 1, Diversity is not defined as the relinquishing of standards. Diversity is not defined as the relinquishing of standards. The minimization of requirements is not synonymous with the relinquishing of standards. The minimization of requirements is not the same as giving away standards and expectations. If you are to diversify your program's population, you must begin with your approach to the audition and rubrics used to evaluate a student's ability and overall potential. Two big words: training. To teach a particular skill or type of behavior through practice and instruction over a period of time. From its Latin origin, the word means to pull or draw in. I found that especially inspiring. Talent, natural aptitude or skill. Natural aptitude or skill. It is indeed our job to create classrooms and populations of young artists that reflect the world and industry, as you have heard mentioned so many times, so eloquently this evening. It's important that they are connected by art and that they are forced to discover one another inside and out prior to their entry into the program and post matriculation from your program. This is achieved by creating safe spaces, having an honest audition process where expectations are shared, students are challenged, and talent and training are celebrated. Again, honest audition experiences where expectations are shared, students are indeed challenged, and talent and training are celebrated. For some, this means that the church was their conservatory. For others, a top-tier performing arts curriculum was their conservatory. Both have talent, both are available to the process of creating. The challenge then is not for the student, the challenge is for the instructor and the institution holding the auditions. It is always easier to work with those ideas and people that are the same. But to diversify our programs, we must diversify the means by which we admit students into our programs. That requires creativity, it requires work, and most times it requires a commitment to me as an instructor, learning more, being open to more, being willing to explore and make space for all. I'm so excited to turn this conversation over to my friend Ellen Lettrick, founder and executive director of the nonprofit Fund for College Auditions. Take it away, Ellen.
Thanks, Marty. I sat and nodded and nodded and nodded at everything you said. So I'm Ellen Lettrick. I've been a high school theater educator for 29 years, including 7 years full-time in the high school classroom. I was actually also a social studies teacher, and we had fun. We had a lot of costumes, and it was rigorous academically. And I have two main passions in the college audition process. One is developing young singers and actors of song, and I parlayed that after I was a high school teacher into attending grad school and receiving a master's in speech pathology at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh. And I actually got my post-baccalaureate teaching certificate several years before at Seton Hill, where Adriel teaches. So that's a neat connection, a small little school, not Seton Hall, Seton Hill. And so developing young singers and leading with a belief that everyone can develop, almost everyone, unless there's generally, unless there's a medical developmental reason why not, can develop significantly as a singer. And that ties back into the idea of talent versus training. And when Marty first spoke that at our first meeting, I just knew we were going to be fast friends, because that's been a theme in my education career for a very long time. My other passion, and it grew and grew and grew over all of the years until I finally did something about it, is supporting those with great passion but very few financial resources. And so after many years of heading the for-profit college audition coaching company, which I unintentionally founded, it's a long story, called MTCA, Music Theater College Auditions, I sold it to two trusted colleagues in 2019 and used that money to begin to develop the Fund for College Auditions, which was officially incorporated in May 2019. We received our 501c3 status as a nonprofit in January. the first day of New York Unifieds, kind of providentially. And this past year, we were able to support 7 scholars through their entire audition processes using donor contributions and money earned through fundraisers with the Broadway community performing. We were able to pay for anything that they needed to level the playing field as much as you can in 6 to 9 months with a student to put them on an equal playing field with their much better resourced peers. These included artistic lessons, college audition counseling to help with all the bits and pieces of applications if they needed that guidance. Some had very involved families, some did not. More did than didn't, but it's still a lot of balls in the air. So some of the families needed that support too. All the travel, all of the application fees that couldn't be waived. And 6 of those 7 were Black students. 1 was non-binary, 1 was trans, who also happened to be white. And so in my role as executive director, which is currently a volunteer position, so you know, I'm not here to advertise anything, not making money from this, just my passion. I have other jobs that give me money, thankfully. I experienced the various challenges with 7 different families with the common thread of truly significant income challenges. And as we know, there's a racial wealth gap for all the systemic reasons dating back to slavery, you know, the first slaves here. So those financial challenges, and as we see in our applications to our nonprofit, are more students of color than not. Although we certainly aren't adverse to students of color helping students who are not students of color. And I'm going to share my screen with you if I can remember how to do it, so I can show you our mission statement. And then I made some notes that really are going to echo a lot of what you heard from Marty. Start here. Here we go. Okay. And I have to apologize. It's probably going to be a little funky looking. I killed part of my screen with liquid, so there's a little color and you can see stuff underneath it. So this is our mission statement. I've talked a lot about it already. Again, focusing on those who are in underrepresented groups, but not limited to those. We really screen first for significant financial need. We use the housing and urban development criteria, which is nice because it adjusts for family size and where you live. So these are, and I know a lot of you who are on the call or know of you, and I feel like I'm not here to preach, but I'm speaking to the choir who spoke to me about a lot of these things. But these are things that I've seen most vividly this year. So just considerations to increase equity in the college audition process. Financial action steps, which I know are not easy from a bureaucratic perspective from what I've learned, but things that really, in being the person with the credit card who paid for 7 students' audition processes this year, not my money, but the credit card in my control, the university fees, sometimes the waivers, they just don't quite, no matter how low income the person, they don't quite meet the different criteria to get fee waivers. And I don't fully understand how those formulas work. I just know that there were significantly low income students who couldn't get fee waivers, and that adds up to thousands of dollars. So any pre-screen fees, anything like that that can be waived will help equitability. And 2 other things that, again, I'm sure not easy. No one has money, especially right now, but providing travel grants to accepted students' weekends or solo campus visits for students whom you accept. Our mission right now, and we only can fund a small group of students. We're working on initiatives that we'll touch more, but it can only take them through the audition process. Basically, after Unifieds, we're broke if they travel. And we're a new organization, so we're still raising funds, and it's have been really exciting that we have young people raising funds who know how hard this is, either because they saw their peers go through it or they did. And the same thing, providing travel grants to students whom you invite to callback weekends. I know that doesn't apply to a lot of schools, but it applies to some really wonderful schools. So that's another travel expense. And then a new challenge that we're all wrestling with is with live video auditions, as we know, because of homeschooling during COVID in the spring, not every student has access to space to do a dance call, for example. And I know everyone's figuring out what they're doing. Again, this is no blame, no fault. I know you are my colleagues, the people on this call. Privacy, do they have even a quiet place to be? And then, of course, adequate internet. So none of us know how to solve that right now. And the educational action steps are things that Marty already referred to, talent versus training. Now, I'm going to speak specifically to the vocal aspect because I've had so many years of experience with that. And I know that there are it factors, and there are, man, I just love that person. And again, I've been observing this process and helping students through hundreds of students over many years. So all of that makes total sense to me. But if there could be and I think Marty set this up really nicely, if there could be any kind of rubric sharing, anything that you know, even if it's never been written down or spoken, you know, I'm looking for A, B, and C. Like they have to be able to navigate their passaggio if they're a young woman. They have to be able to produce chest dominant and head dominant sound. And, you know, none of us agree on those terms. It doesn't matter. The speech scientists say, like, call it purple. We all know what we're talking about. Affinity for musical styling might be something else. And why? So these can be communicated to the students and whoever's helping them prep, whether that is someone from church, someone from a community group, their high school drama teacher, and like I said, share the rubrics if there are those. As much as you can quantify that, which isn't a lot, probably. And another thing that I believe Britney spoke about really eloquently, and I just had an experience with a new student who's from China. She moved here when she was 14, and she was trained in classical Chinese opera when she was little, and then she wasn't trained once she went through puberty and developed her, you know, achieved her adult woman larynx. And so I don't know if her singing skill, I didn't get to spend enough time with her, which is a problem, of course, that happens in college auditions, to know if her pitchiness and I don't know enough about classical Chinese opera. I just have a vague sense of the sound, so I am not the person to judge this. But I think part of what I was hearing sound-wise that made her sound extremely pitchy, like not good at all, was that she doesn't have a lot of experience training in Western singing, and she loves it, and she's so passionate, and she was a heck of an actor of song. But in both songs she sang, you know, I was very honest and said it's going to take, and this is not a scholarship student, this is a student that has sufficient funds to just cannonball with voice lessons. But is it, the overall question, is it possible for a student with palpable passion and clear acting skill, if they're not, you know, basically how good do they have to be for you to see through the roughness? And that's maybe an unanswerable question, but that is such a helpful thing for those preparing people that don't have a lot of resources. And again, our fund makes it possible for the students we're able to select, and it's hard to say no to anyone, but resources are limited to have that specific training. But there are, if that could be known, that would be extremely helpful. Or, and again, pipe dream, provide more time to play with the students singing in the audition. And I am not knowledgeable about, I always say, you don't want me helping you with your monologues. And I know a little bit about dance auditions, but I'm not a skilled technician. But are there ways to do that? And I'm sure many of you have created those. And I know you spend time in the audition room. And so maybe this is already happening. But these are the things that I've observed with the cohorts that I've taught, and especially in particular this year, the student who did least well, and you know, I wasn't in the room with them, but they were by far the least skilled vocally, and then they blossomed after the audition process. Also, by far the worst economic situation. So, you know, there are many more the factors than singing. That's what I focus on as a teacher. But it would have been really good to know specifically what they needed to bring to the room, if that could be quantified. And then this is for BIPOC students, especially the elephant in the room, or the unwritten rules is what are they expected to do? So for years I wrestled with, do I tell a Black girl that doesn't belt that she's probably going to be asked to belt? And that's racist and it sucks, but is it going to happen? And I'm not talking about in the professional world. That's not something I understand. Those are different standards. It's about when they're coming to you as this raw talent. There are plenty of BIPOC students who have plenty of money and they're well trained. So that's why in the other slides I said low income. This is for BIPOC students in general, because they could be well trained. I have a student now who's at a top musical, one of the top musical theater programs. It's an excellent program. She doesn't belt at all. She's a trained soprano. She still doesn't really belt, and she's going to be a sophomore. And she encountered that question time and time again. And do you have an August Wilson monologue? And I know there are many other Black playwrights, but those are questions my students have gotten over the years. And someone mentioned, I think it was Kent mentioned, can you be more urban? I mean, that is a direct quote that students have been told. So those kinds of things, and why addressing, I mean, I think most people who are listening probably think, that's anathema, I wouldn't do that. But we need to prepare BIPOC auditionees to navigate assumptions, which they may not know exist. One of the students this year that was asked to be more, kind of like more urban or more angry, and they just said, I don't talk like that. They were so taken aback, and they said in the audition room, and it wasn't combative, it was just truth. And then this is something I just thought of as I was listening. Openly defined material, we used to have those do not do lists. Openly defined material that's only appropriate for certain races to present in college auditions. How you would address that specifically, it's a big ask, but this is a genuinely new concept to many white high school students, and they're mad and they're shocked. And that's part of the education that makes the environment welcoming to the BIPOC student, the potential college BIPOC student is, look, they get it. They're telling the white girls, don't sing your daddy's son, even though there's nothing in the text about her being black. Of course, that's the whole point of the book. So yeah, and that's just our mission statement. So that's what I have to share. I hope I didn't go over. And I would love to answer any of your questions. And I thank you for including me to this panel, because I am the kind of outlier as a non-collegiate educator. I've never really taught at the college level, just workshops about vocal health. And I love that Tim refers to the high school educators as like the connective tissue. I think that's really cool. So thank you so much. And I would really like to bring back again, Mr. Kent Gash from NYU Tisch.
Great. Hang on. Yes, my video is not, the host has to start my video again. Okay. All right, here we go. Hi, everybody. I'm back. I want to talk a little bit and build a little bit on things that have been said by my colleagues so eloquently. I think that, it's often the question, sort of, what are people looking for in these auditions? And I mean, that's a question even that you get from actors professionally as well, but certainly in the student situation, as people are auditioning for schools, what are they looking for? And I love the idea of us discussing talent versus training. And I would even take it a step further to say that, in fact, talent and potential trainability, if that's even, I'm inventing a word, I'm less interested, actually, and I think as a department, NYU, I can say the department is less interested in the sort of uber polished, slick, I've been to 15 coaches for auditions for how to get into strong theater programs. We can smell that. We can smell it in like the first 2 or 3 words of the audition. And what it is false. It's so much polish and so much preconceived idea and trying to anticipate or calculate what it is you think people want to see. And both professionally and at this stage of an audition process, that is not what we're looking for. Authenticity, honesty, your truth, the truthful evocation of where you and your material intersect. And I'm talking more about the acting work now than I am about the singing audition or the dance audition, although I will address how we at the new studio on Broadway, part of how we approach those auditions. We have had a real spike of auditions, both of international students and of students of color. And that has been very exciting and very meaningful to all of us in the new studio on Broadway. I do want to address, I'll come back to the audition process thing in a second, but I do also want to address sustainability. I would ask all of us who teach in university programs to really examine and task your university to the best of your abilities. It is not enough that we accept extremely gifted and talented students of color, BIPOC students. That's not enough. There has to be a little bit of insurance or insulation that we're going to do everything we can to support and sustain those students through their 4 years. And I mean things like mentor groups. If you have faculty of color, is there a mentor group at a space where the students of color can convene with their faculty of color, not just to have a bitch and moan session, maybe that's what comes out of it, maybe it's not, but also for them to be able to talk about honestly and openly about their experience, and also to be mentored so that they can, in the same way that Black sororities and Black fraternities have been mentoring programs and have helped with the matriculation of graduates into the industry and the field. What are the many ways we can support the wellness and well-being of those students? Because there are particular pressures that occur when students of color attend predominantly white universities and predominantly white training programs. There are real issues. And I'm not putting the New Studio forward as a program that has always gotten it right. I actually think we've gotten it wrong a couple of times in a big way, and have really had to learn a great deal about this, about how to sustain and support students and their well-being and their good health. And I don't mean just good physical health, but I mean emotional, spiritual, and psychological health. Because we're responsible for the whole student the moment we accept them, and their wellness must be a priority. Back to the audition process. The truthful, honest evocation. I talked about in the audition process, looking for or hearing the students sing a song that they love to sing, a song of great joy for them, a song that they love. Not the song that's calculated to demonstrate that I can belt this note. Not automatically singing Glitter and Be Gay because I can pop all of that, and I want to make sure you know that. Now, if you really love Glitter and Be Gay, great. Glitter and Be Gay to your heart's content, and good luck. But not doing a piece of material, either acting-wise or singing-wise, not choosing material because somebody told you you should do it, but doing something that you love, doing something that you care about, doing something that allows us to get to know you as a human being through the material that you present, which is actually the key of every successful audition. Who are you as a human being? Where do you intersect with the material? And how do you connect to the material? I don't think that demonstrating training is an essential aspect of a successful audition. If you have training and your training is solid, then that training will be evident in the quality of your work. But there are people who are wildly talented, who are quote unquote untrained, that we respond to immediately. And that's because there's a connection, and an undeniable connection between them and what they're doing. There's a truth in what they're doing. There's an originality in what they're doing. And training is why they're coming to us. So people who come to the program, with great training, if all they're demonstrating is great training and no humanity, I'm likely to be much less interested in them. Because technical proficiency alone is finally not what the world needs more of. So I personally don't have a deep interest in that. In terms of dance background and training, we audition students, and there are students who are accepted into our program who have wildly diverse dance backgrounds, and then some who have no dance training at all, but who have a responsiveness to music, who are expressive to music. How does the body respond to music? How does the body respond to rhythm? What is physical expression? What is heightened physical expression? If there's a connection to that, if there's freedom, and if there is a willingness to jump into the deep end of the pool, if there is a fearlessness about exploration, these are all things that we're looking for in an audition. How freely, how willing are you to play? How freely can you play? How quickly can you engage what if? How responsive is the imagination? How free are you? Without a calculation or even a worry or concern about, is this what you want? Am I getting it right? Is it right? Am I doing it right? That's death. And it's death in a creative process. It's death in a creative process. What does your heart tell you? How present can your heart be in the room? People are always asking, what are you looking for? Well, that's a big part of what I'm looking for and what we're looking for at the new studio on Broadway. Because finally, the training, the technical facility, that's why they're coming to us. So we can begin to provide that while keeping the imagination, the sense of play, the sense of heart, the sense of truth, constantly centered in everything that we do. The authentic human being centered in the work. I think I'm done.
What a great punctuation to those statements. Thank you, Mr. Gash and Professor Gash. And also, I will say, you answered some of the questions in the Q&A with your statements. Kind of one of them being we had an anonymous attendee as a dance educator who coaches musical theater students who might not be trained. They go on, but they're talking about how some musical theater programs require classical ballet videos and or classical ballet auditions. And this individual stated that ballet is traditionally exclusive to those students who have the financial means to study in private studios. Anything we can do to advocate against this requirement? We had another attendee ask, are there certain schools I can direct my students to that value all forms of training and talent? Sounds like NYU has those. I'm sure there's some other answers that can go along with that in terms of, and that's where our MTEA directory will come in handy, hopefully, because it'll have statements from the people who run the programs themselves, as opposed to people who write about programs. It's ultimately better to have the individuals who run the programs' voices to share that. So I just thought I would jump in and kind of answer those.
May I add something to that discussion as well?
Yeah.
So they are most definitely welcome to come and audition at Howard University, and we will do our very best to find space and room. But we also ask the students when they come to participate in the dance audition that typically will, at some point you'll find yourself on the bar, on the ballet bar, not looking for skill, but looking for the ability to be trained, trainability. And that has more to do with character than it does with years of study. Are you respectful? Can you take a note? Can you take a correction? Are you available to a very personalized style of instruction where our amazing dance faculty are putting their hands to show alignment, to begin the process of breaking habits that have been formed just because they've not had a professional experience in terms of training. And so I would suggest, particularly for students of color, we have to also remember that in the high school arena, I can recall being told not to go to an HBCU. My guidance counselor told me not to go to Florida A&M. because she felt like I was more intelligent, that I could go elsewhere. And as a student born of two parents that graduated from HBCUs, I've always seen brilliance and never questioned my ability, because I decided, my siblings decided, that we would attend an historically black college university. But they are there for those reasons. They were created for those reasons. They were created to serve as pillars in communities where traditionally persons of color, particularly BIPOC students, were not able to attend the predominantly white institutions. And for many of these institutions, that is still one of the highest precepts: excellence with caring, that everybody is valued. And as you've heard Kent speak so eloquently, there are programs that are diversifying their faculty and being very clear that is their desire, that they're not looking for the best, but they're looking for students that are willing to work hard to become the best. And those are two different ideologies. So it still falls on us to do the work, do the homework, find those spaces, and then also offer up, particularly in these days of COVID, to not be so proud that we don't say to parents, maybe your child needs to begin at a junior college and get some experience and training there. It's much cheaper, it's closer to home, and it affords them the opportunity to be in a space that, again, is designed to help cultivate the collegiate experience as students are developing and becoming more responsible in those ways.
Thank you. And I assume, Professor Lamar, that was also hearkening to Amy Mew's question about what advice would you give me to help best prepare my students of color for college theater programs? What do they need to hear from me the most? This is a high school, apparently a high school educator.
And sometimes you have to take the big, bold steps of going to the churches where our students are studying and finding out what that training is. I also work in ministry. It's a big part of my life, has been since I was 12 years old. And now in my role, I'm very clear. It makes no sense to have students participating in dance ministries that are not allowing them some kind of formidable training, right? And so sometimes many churches, like many institutions, they lack the resource. And so you'd be surprised how many churches will welcome you coming in and giving some kind of a workshop on things like that. You'd really be surprised at how many parents have their students involved in community performing arts programs, but many of those persons don't have any formal training because, again, they did not have the resources to do so, but they are still fulfilling a need. So it really is having that connective tissue, as Ellen was talking about, to kind of build bridges that would allow us to prepare students of color right where they are.
Thank you. And I would echo that question to the rest of you, and actually all of our panelists, of the advice to best help prepare students of color for college theater programs. What do they need to hear from their high school educators? But I think it's also really important for our college educators on here to be hearing this, because I think, I hope a lot of wheels are turning for a lot of educators on this call who are listening and hearing the different kinds of struggles and the different kinds of barriers in relationship to that. And so also, and I agree with you that college educators should be recruiting actively in a way that is intentional in the communities, not just holding auditions and accepting or not accepting. So I'm wondering if the panelists want to speak to that question, because it's a good question to kind of end our evening on, is the advice that you would give high school educators to help prepare their students of color for college musical theater programs and auditioning.
Yeah, I'd like to weigh in on that. Harking back to what Kent said, I love how NYU reflects this in their audition, and it's a musical theater song, at least I always say, up to and including this year, but I don't anticipate, it probably won't change. A musical theater song that's part of the canon, and then something you love to sing is what NYU requires. And I come across students every day who have not really accurate perceptions of either how talented they are. They've underestimated their talent because they think, oh, I can't belch, or I can't sing soprano. And part of what they're doing is they're using inaccurate definitions of what those sounds are. So I think for any high school educator who's working musically, start with that, what your kids love to sing, and try not to fixate on, try to get them to not fixate, because it's not, I'm sure it's not coming from the choir or the voice educators. It's coming from the kids, like belting and skrelting and all those terms. Say, forget that. It's they truly are not agreed upon terms in the medical community and the New York Voice community, no community. So to start from with what they love and just make sure that's being produced healthily, and to identify the high school educators can help identify what the students are really, what their affinity is, starting from what they love, but then you're so good at this style, and that's pretty objective, honestly. So yeah, I think that would.
I also think there's a deep, simple idea that we could communicate to the young people who we encounter and who we engage, starting with the idea that you are enough. Everything that you need to make this work is already within you. And you are not deficient. There is nothing about your life experience or who you are as a human being that makes you deficient or less than. So much of what young people hear in criticism and assessment is, oh, I'm not this, oh, I'm not that, well, but what about what you are? And how about celebrating that in everything you do? And then if people want it, they want it. And if they don't, go to the party where they do. I had an aunt that used to say all the time, everywhere I go, they love me because I don't go anywhere where they don't.
I would also say, definitely. I will also say, as my colleague said earlier, but determine the climate of the institution. So is that climate conducive for Adriel Hilton to be successful? Is that climate conducive for me to get mentorship and guidance? Is that climate conducive for me to graduate? This is non-theater, but a young doc student contacted me today, working on their PhD and is having a horrific time in the climate of that institution, may not complete their PhD. Again, lack of mentorship. The climate is not conducive for them to be there. There's no one there to assist them in their development and follow through. So you have to make sure that the climate is conducive for them. And Beverly Tatum speaks to that well. When she was looking for a place for her son to major in physics, they flew around the country, but of course she was a sitting president. She had the capacity to fly around the country because she was president of Spelman College, but they flew to several campus visits with her son and her husband. And they selected University of Maryland, Baltimore County, because that was the place where the most Black physicists were completing their degrees. There was a support structure for them. There was a Meyerhoff Scholars Program. The president was a male of color, Dr. Freeman Habrowski. And so he attended that institution. Great question.
Yeah, and that's a great answer in terms of some of the action items that I'm sure everybody on this call is preparing to do. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tim. A quick note about thank you all for your amazing questions. If we didn't get to them, I'm very, very sorry. Some of them require more than 3 minutes on a webinar to unpack, but we hope that those questions will continue to stir and that you will continue to the conversation with other MTEA members to make that come to fruition.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you, Kent. Thank you, everyone on the panel, and thank you, everyone that is presented this evening. I hope that this evening, these past 3 hours, gave you a lot of information to digest and to unpack. I know as a host, it certainly has, and I'm just sincerely grateful to spend these past 3 hours with each and every one of you. If you have questions, I'll provide my email in the link in the chat box so you can reach out. I am merely a vessel for this committee, and I'm excited to continue to share the important work that we are working on and developing as the months progress, and we are excited to share that with you as we continue. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight, and rest safely. Bye-bye.